They say your 35th birthday should be a celebration. Mine became the day my father tried to erase me from the family tree. In front of dinner guests, staff, and my sister's wealthy friends, Harold Sinclair slammed a DNA test kit onto the table in front of me. "Let's settle this once and for all," he announced with a cruel smile. "I want to know if you're even mine, or if you're just another man's mistake like I've always suspected." The room went silent. My sister smirked, and I felt something inside me shatter that I didn't know could still break. I should have cried. I should have screamed. Instead, I walked away humiliated but somehow awakened. Because what my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my late mother had been preparing for this exact moment. For 8 years she'd been gone, but she'd left me something more powerful than money. She'd left me the truth. 3 months later, when the family estate lawyer summoned Harold, my sister Lucia, and their powerful business associate to an emergency meeting, one that centered entirely on me. Their faces went from arrogant confidence to genuine fear in seconds. "You see, my mother didn't just leave me an inheritance. She left me evidence, recordings, documents, secrets that would unravel 30 years of lies, expose a dangerous criminal, and reveal the shocking truth about who my family really was." This is the story of how the daughter they dismissed became the woman they should have feared. And trust me, by the end, you'll understand why they call karma the sweetest revenge of all. Buckle up. This is going to be one hell of a reckoning. My name is Brooke Sinclair. I'm 35 years old, and I work as a financial analyst for a mid-sized consulting firm in the city. For the past 8 years, I've lived 2 hours away from the family estate, building a quiet, independent life that my father once called disappointingly ordinary, and my sister still refers to as charmingly simple. I tell people the distance is for work, but the truth is simpler and more painful. I needed to escape. The drive back to the Sinclair estate for my birthday felt longer than usual, and not just because of the October rain that turned the highway into a blur of red taillights. My hands were clammy on the steering wheel, and I kept rehearsing excuses to leave early. "I have work tomorrow. I'm not feeling well. The weather's getting worse." Anything to avoid spending more than a few hours in that house. But some part of me, the part that still hoped despite everything, wondered if maybe this time would be different. 8 years was a long time. People changed, didn't they? Maybe my father had softened. Maybe Lucia had grown up. Maybe I'd finally be welcomed home like a daughter, not tolerated like an inconvenient obligation. I should have known better. The moment I pulled up to the circular driveway, I saw Lucia's Mercedes parked prominently by the front entrance, gleaming despite the rain. My father's Bentley sat in its usual spot. I parked my practical Honda Civic near the garage where it wouldn't offend anyone's aesthetic sensibilities. As I grabbed my overnight bag and the modest birthday cake I'd bought for myself because no one else would, I noticed Thomas, our longtime groundskeeper, quickly look away when I waved. He'd always been kind to me when I was young, but even he seemed uncomfortable acknowledging my presence now. Inside the house smelled the same expensive flowers, furniture polish, and old money. The marble floors gleamed. Everything was in its place, cold and perfect. I heard Lucia's laughter from the living room, followed by my father's low rumble of approval. The sound made my stomach clench. I'd heard that tone 1,000 times growing up, but never directed at me. "Oh, you're here." Lucia appeared in the hallway, martini in hand, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. At 32, my younger sister had perfected the art of looking effortlessly superior. Her dark hair was styled in loose waves that took hours and hundreds of dollars to achieve, though she'd claim she just threw it up this morning. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We wondered if you'd actually show up." "Happy birthday to you too," I said, keeping my voice steady. She glanced at my jeans and sweater with barely concealed disdain. "Dinner's at 7. Try to look presentable." Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble like little hammers. I stood there for a moment, bag in hand, feeling like a stranger in the house where I grew up. The family photos lining the hallway told the story clearly. Lucia at her college graduation, beaming beside our father. Lucia cutting the ribbon at the opening of her boutique funded entirely by Harold. Lucia at charity galas, horse shows, European vacations. I appeared in exactly 3 photographs, and in each one I was partially cut off or standing at the edge of the frame as if whoever took the picture couldn't be bothered to center me properly. My old bedroom was exactly as I'd left it 8 years ago. Same floral bedspread I'd picked out at 16. Same desk where I'd studied for hours trying to earn the academic achievements that never seemed to impress my father the way Lucia's social successes did. Even the books on the shelf were arranged in the same order. It was like a museum exhibit, the Forgotten Daughters Room, circa 2017. No one had bothered to change it, but no one had bothered to maintain it either. A thin layer of dust covered everything. I sat on the bed and immediately regretted coming. Dinner was worse than I'd imagined, and I'd imagined it would be bad. The dining room table was set for 8, my father at the head, Lucia to his right, and an assortment of her wealthy friends filling the other seats. There was also a distinguished older man I didn't recognize, someone my father introduced as a long-time business associate. I was seated at the far end, practically in the kitchen doorway, while everyone else clustered around Harold like planets orbiting the sun. The conversation flowed around me as if I weren't there. They discussed stock portfolios, vacation homes in the Hamptons, and some charity gala Lucia was organizing. Every few minutes my father would praise something Lucia had done, his voice warm with pride I'd never heard directed at me. "That's my girl," he'd say, or "I always knew you had excellent instincts." Lucia would beam and touch his arm affectionately, and I would take another bite of food I couldn't taste and try to remember why I'd convinced myself this visit was a good idea. Then, between the main course and dessert, everything changed. Harold stood up, his chair scraping against the floor with an authority that commanded immediate silence. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box, the kind that DNA test kits come in. I recognized it immediately. My heart started pounding. He walked the length of the table and slammed it down in front of me hard enough that my water glass trembled. "Since you're here," he announced to the entire room, his voice dripping with contempt, "let's settle this once and for all. I want to know if you're even mine or if you're some other man's mistake like I've always suspected." The room went completely silent. 8 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. I could feel the heat rising in my face, could hear my pulse thundering in my ears. Lucia's friends looked shocked but thrilled. This was better than any reality show. Lucia herself wore a smirk that barely tried to hide her satisfaction. Even the business associate looked uncomfortable, though he said nothing. "Harold," someone began weakly, but my father cut them off with a dismissive wave. 35 years, he continued, of wondering if you're actually my blood or just evidence of your mother's poor judgment. Well, take the test, Brooke. Prove you belong here. Or prove I was right all along. I stared at the box, my vision blurring at the edges. This wasn't just cruelty. This was annihilation. This was my father in front of witnesses, in front of strangers, declaring that I was so unwanted, so other that even my DNA was suspect. I should have cried. I should have screamed. I should have thrown the test kit back in his face. Instead, I stood up slowly, my legs surprisingly steady. I looked my father directly in the eyes and said with a calmness I didn't feel, "I'll take it. I'll prove exactly who I am." Then I walked out of the dining room, up the stairs, and into my childhood bedroom where I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. I sat on that dusty bed and realized something had broken inside me, but not in the way my father intended. What broke was my willingness to keep hoping he'd ever love me. What broke was the part of me that still believed I deserved his rejection. In its place, something harder and clearer crystallized a determination to never let them make me feel small again. I didn't know it then, but my mother had been preparing me for this exact moment. Unable to sleep, unable to even process what had happened downstairs, I found myself going through the boxes of my mother's belongings that had been stored in my closet since her death 8 years ago. Harold had never bothered to sort through them, and I'd taken them to preserve what little I had left of her. My hands moved automatically, seeking comfort in the familiar items: her favorite scarf, a book of poetry with her notes in the margins, photographs from before everything went wrong. That's when I found it. Tucked inside an old photo album sealed with wax was an envelope in my mother's handwriting. The front read simply, "For Brooke, when the time is right." My hands trembled as I opened it, and my entire world shifted on its axis. The wax seal cracked under my thumb, brittle after 8 years of waiting. I unfolded the paper carefully, half afraid it might disintegrate in my hands, and immediately recognized my mother's elegant cursive, the same handwriting that used to appear on birthday cards and encouraging notes tucked into my school lunches. But this was different. The letters were slightly shaky, as if written in haste or under stress. My eyes went straight to the date at the top: October 14th, 2017, 2 weeks before she died. My breath caught in my throat. 2 weeks. She'd written this just 2 weeks before the car accident that took her from me. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The official report said she'd lost control on a curve, that the weather had been bad, that sometimes these things just happened. I was 27, then devastated and lost, and I'd accepted what the police told us, because the alternative, that something more sinister had occurred, seemed like the paranoid thinking of a grieving daughter. But there had always been something about that accident that felt wrong. My mother was an excellent driver. She'd driven that route 1,000 times. And the night before she died, I remembered her seeming distracted, almost frightened, though she'd dismissed my concerns with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Now, holding this letter dated so close to her death, that old unease came flooding back. "My dearest Brooke." The letter began, and I had to blink back tears to keep reading. "If you're reading this, it means the cruelty has reached its peak. I know Harold has been terrible to you, and I'm sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive. But I've prepared something that will protect you now." I pressed my hand to my mouth, overwhelmed by hearing my mother's voice again after all these years, even if only through words on paper. The truth about this family, about Harold, about Lucia, about why they've treated you this way, is not what it seems. You have more power than they've ever let you believe. Go to Maxwell and Associates law firm. Ask for Robert Maxwell. Tell him I sent you. He's been waiting. Maxwell and Associates. Robert Maxwell. I'd never heard those names before. My mother had arranged this, whatever this was, without anyone knowing, including me. The implications made my head spin. What kind of truth required a lawyer? What kind of power could I possibly have in a family that had spent 3 decades making me feel powerless? I read the letter again, then a third time, searching for hidden meanings in every word. My mind raced with questions that had no immediate answers. Why had she kept secrets from me? If she knew Harold was terrible to me, why hadn't she confronted him while she was alive? What did she mean by the truth about this family? And most chilling of all, had she known she was in danger when she wrote this? The date suggested she had. She'd prepared this letter, sealed it, hidden it, where only I would eventually find it. And then 2 weeks later, she was dead. I thought back to those final weeks before the accident, details I'd buried under years of grief suddenly surfacing with painful clarity. She had been anxious, I realized now. There were phone calls she'd take in another room, conversations she'd end abruptly when someone walked in. I'd caught her crying once late at night in the kitchen, and when I asked what was wrong, she'd pulled me into a fierce hug and said, "You're stronger than all of them combined, Brooke. Don't ever forget that. No matter what happens, remember you're stronger." At the time, I'd thought she was just being an encouraging mother trying to build up my confidence in the face of Harold's constant dismissal. Now I understood it was more than that. It was a warning. It was preparation. It was her way of telling me that I would need that strength for something she couldn't explicitly name. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the letter. I smoothed it out on my lap and forced myself to focus, to read every word one more time, and that's when I saw it, a line near the bottom that I'd somehow skimmed over in my emotional state. "The family has been hiding something far worse than cruelty." I stared at those words, my heart pounding. Worse than cruelty. Worse than 35 years of rejection and emotional abuse. Worse than the public humiliation I'd just endured downstairs. What could possibly be worse than the way they'd treated me my entire life? And why did I have the terrible feeling that my mother had died because she'd discovered the answer I didn't sleep that night? I sat on my childhood bed with my mother's letter in my hands, reading it over and over until the words blurred together and dawn light crept through the curtains. By 6 a.m, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to wait. I wasn't going to second-guess myself or talk myself out of this. I packed my bag, walked past the closed doors of Harold and Lucia's rooms, and left the estate without saying goodbye to anyone. The drive back to the city felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream where everything looked normal but nothing made sense anymore. My mother had secrets. She'd prepared for something. And somehow a lawyer I'd never met had been waiting 8 years for me to find out. Maxwell and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming high-rise in the financial district. The kind of building where every surface screamed money and power. I felt underdressed in yesterday's clothes, my eyes red from lack of sleep, but I walked through those polished glass doors anyway, clutching my mother's letter like a lifeline. The receptionist looked up with professional courtesy as I approached her marble desk. "How can I help you?" "I need to speak with Robert Maxwell," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "My name is Brooke Sinclair. My mother was Catherine Sinclair." The change in her expression was immediate and unmistakable. Professional courtesy shifted to something like recognition, even reverence. "One moment, please." She picked up the phone, spoke quietly, then looked at me with what might have been sympathy. "Mr. Maxwell will see you right away." Before I could even process that, before I could sit down or catch my breath, a tall, distinguished man emerged from the elevator. He had to be in his late 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to assess everything in a single glance. He walked directly toward me, and I knew without introduction who he was. "Brooke Sinclair." It wasn't a question. "I've been waiting 8 years for you to walk through that door." His hand was warm and steady when I shook it, and something about his presence, calm, authoritative, certain, made me feel like I could finally stop holding everything together by sheer willpower alone. "Please come with me." He led me past the receptionist into a private elevator that required a key card and up to what I assumed was his personal office. The space was elegant but not ostentatious, lined with legal volumes and framed credentials. He closed the door behind us, and I heard the distinct click of a lock engaging. From a locked cabinet he withdrew a file folder so thick it had to be held together with elastic bands. My mother's name was written across the tab in neat block letters, Catherine Elise Sinclair. "Your mother and I worked together for 3 years before her death," Maxwell said, settling into the chair across from me and opening the file with careful reverence. "She was meticulous, determined, and absolutely certain that one day you would need what she'd prepared." I couldn't speak. I could only stare at the documents spread before me. Legal papers, financial statements, pages and pages of what looked like investigative notes in my mother's handwriting. "Your mother had resources that your father never knew about." Maxwell began, his tone measured and professional. "She came from money herself, her family's wealth, investments, property holdings, trust funds that her parents established for her. When she married Harold, she deliberately kept these assets separate. Over the years, especially after she realized the kind of man Harold truly was, she quietly built this portfolio with one goal in mind: protecting you." He slid a financial summary across the desk. The numbers made my head spin. Millions. Multiple millions. Properties in 3 states. Investment accounts that had been growing compound interest for decades. "This is mine," I whispered. "It will be," Maxwell corrected gently. "Your mother established a trust with very specific conditions. The assets can only be fully released to you when your legal status as Harold Sinclair's biological daughter is confirmed through DNA testing." The irony hit me like a physical blow. Harold's cruel test, his public humiliation, his attempt to prove I didn't belong, that was exactly what would unlock my mother's protection. She'd known. Somehow, she'd known he would eventually do this. She knew Harold would challenge my paternity, I said slowly, understanding dawning. She predicted it, yes. Your mother was an exceptional judge of character, Brooke. She understood Harold's weaknesses and how they would manifest. She prepared for this specific scenario. Maxwell's expression shifted, then becoming darker, more grave. But there's something else you need to know. Your mother didn't just build this trust to provide financial security. She built it as protection against something or someone far more dangerous than Harold's cruelty. He pulled out another document, this one sealed in an envelope marked with my mother's handwriting, for Brooke's eyes only. Catherine believed someone close to your family was manipulating Harold, someone with dangerous intentions. She didn't have concrete proof when she created this trust, but she had strong suspicions. Strong enough that she documented everything she discovered, every concern, every piece of circumstantial evidence she could gather. He paused, meeting my eyes with an intensity that made my stomach drop. Brooke, if what your mother believed is true, then her death 8 years ago may not have been an accident. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the arms of my chair, forcing myself to breathe. Read this, Maxwell said, sliding the envelope toward me. Read what she wrote, and then we'll discuss what happens next. But before I could open it, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost urgent. Brooke, your mother wrote one more thing that you need to understand immediately. He pulled out a single page from the bottom of the file, and I recognized my mother's handwriting instantly. She wrote, "You're not the only one who knows what's coming. Be careful who you trust." I left Maxwell's office with my mother's sealed document tucked securely in my bag, but I couldn't bring myself to read it yet. Not there, not in public, not while my hands were still shaking from everything he'd told me. I needed to process what I'd learned, needed to think, and I'd always done my best thinking while driving. The highway stretched ahead of me, familiar and monotonous, and as the miles passed, my mind began to work through the past with a clarity I'd never had before. It was like someone had handed me a different lens through which to view my entire childhood, and suddenly all the inexplicable cruelty, all the confusing moments began to rearrange themselves into a pattern I'd been too close to see. Harold's treatment of me had never been random, I realized. It had always followed a specific trigger, my success. I remembered being 12 years old, bringing home a certificate for placing first in the regional science fair. I'd been so proud, so eager to show him. Most fathers would have been pleased, would have put the certificate on the refrigerator or bragged to their friends. Harold had looked at it for exactly 3 seconds before tossing it on the counter and saying, "You think you're so special, don't you? One little award and you act like you've accomplished something meaningful." The dismissal had crushed me, and I'd learned to stop bringing my achievements home. Then there was high school graduation. I'd been valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to a prestigious university. My mother had been radiant with pride. Harold had attended the ceremony but left immediately afterward without congratulating me. At the graduation dinner, my mother insisted on he'd barely spoken to me. When she'd tried to toast my accomplishments, he'd interrupted with, "All this will mean nothing in the end. College doesn't make you special, Brooke." At the time, I'd internalized it as proof that I simply wasn't good enough, that I needed to work harder, achieve more, be better. Now, driving through the fading afternoon light, I understood something different. Harold hadn't been dismissive because I'd failed to impress him. He'd been hostile because I had succeeded. Every achievement, every step forward I took had triggered something in him that looked a lot like fear. But fear of what? What threat could a child's science fair win possibly pose? What danger could a scholarship represent? Unless it wasn't about me at all. Unless my successes reminded him of something he wanted to forget, or threatened to expose something he needed to keep hidden. The phrases he'd used over the years came back to me now, and I heard them differently. "You've ruined everything just by existing. Not, you're a disappointment, or you're not good enough, but you've ruined everything." Past tense, as if my very birth had destroyed something, altered some plan, created a problem that had never been resolved. If only things had been different. Different how? If I'd never been born, if my mother had made different choices. The statement always hung in the air, incomplete and accusatory. And then the one that had always confused me most. Your mother made choices that destroyed this family. What choices? Marrying him. Having me. I'd asked my mother about it once after a particularly brutal argument between my parents when I was 16. She'd gone pale when I repeated what Harold had said, then pulled me close and whispered, "Your father doesn't always know what he's talking about. Some men blame others for their own weaknesses." That argument between them was seared into my memory now. I'd been doing homework in my room when I'd heard Harold's voice rising sharp with anger. "I know what you're hiding," he'd shouted. "I know the truth, Catherine." My mother's response had been too quiet for me to hear, but I'd crept to the top of the stairs and seen her face. She'd looked terrified but defiant standing in the hallway with her arms crossed, refusing to back down despite Harold looming over her. "You think you can keep secrets forever?" Harold had continued. "You think I don't see what you're doing?" I'd never known what that argument was about. The next day, both my parents had acted like nothing had happened, though my mother had been unusually attentive to me, checking in on me, constantly asking if I was okay, telling me she loved me more times in one day than she usually did in a week. Now I wondered what secret she'd been keeping. What truth had Harold claimed to know, and why had that knowledge made him rage instead of taking action? The timeline was becoming clearer now, and with it a picture I didn't want to see. When I was about 15-20 years ago, everything had changed. That was when Harold's behavior toward me had shifted from distant and cold to actively hostile. Before that, he'd simply ignored me most of the time, treating me like an inconvenient piece of furniture. But around my 15th birthday, something had flipped a switch. He'd started making the cutting remarks, the snide comments about my appearance, my intelligence, my worth. He'd started treating me like I was fundamentally other, like I didn't belong. And that was exactly when Victor Hayes had started appearing at family dinners. The memory came back to me suddenly, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Harold had introduced him as an old business associate, someone he was working with on new ventures. Victor had been charming, courteous to me and Lucia, but I remembered how my mother had tensed whenever he entered the room. She'd been polite but stiff, and she'd always found reasons to cut his visits short. "We should let Victor get back to his evening," she'd say, even when it was barely past dinner. "I'm sure he has important things to do." Harold had seemed almost submissive around Victor, eager to please him, agreeing to things without his usual bluster and authority. At the time, I'd assumed Victor was simply more powerful in business, someone Harold needed to impress. Now I wondered if the dynamic had been something else entirely. Had Harold been afraid of Victor? Had he been controlled by him? And if Victor had been manipulating Harold 20 years ago, right when Harold's treatment of me had turned cruel? What did that mean? I pulled over at a rest stop, my heart racing too fast for safe driving. I needed to look at my mother's document, needed to see what she'd written, but first I had to check something. I pulled out my phone and searched for Victor Hayes, combined with my mother's name and the date of her accident. The search results loaded and my blood turned to ice. There, in a cached version of an old local newspaper article about the accident, was a detail I'd never known Ms. Sinclair was returning from a meeting at a restaurant in the downtown area. The establishment's owner confirmed she'd been dining with an unidentified male companion shortly before the accident. Police have not named the companion, but indicated he is not considered a suspect. My hands shook as I pulled up another search, this time for Victor Hayes's business addresses 8 years ago. One of his corporate offices had been located downtown, just 3 blocks from the restaurant where my mother had eaten her last meal. Victor Hayes had been there the day my mother died. They'd met, they'd talked, and then she'd gotten into her car with brake lines that would fail just minutes later. And somehow I knew with absolute certainty that meeting had been the reason she'd never made it home. I sat in that rest stop parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at the newspaper article on my phone, trying to convince myself I was jumping to conclusions. Maybe it was a coincidence that Victor Hayes had met with my mother hours before she died. Maybe the brake failure really was just a mechanical malfunction. Maybe I was seeing conspiracy where there was only tragedy. But my mother's letter echoed in my mind. The family has been hiding something far worse than cruelty. And Maxwell's warning. If what your mother believed is true, then her death may not have been an accident. I needed to know more about Victor Hayes. Not just what internet searches could tell me, but who he was now, what role he still played in my family's life. If he'd been manipulating Harold for decades, if he'd been there when my mother died, then he was still a threat. And I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. 2 days later, I found myself parked down the street from the Sinclair estate, slouched low in my seat with a baseball cap pulled over my hair. I felt ridiculous, like some amateur detective in a bad movie, but I didn't know what else to do. I'd spent those 2 days reading and rereading my mother's document, which detailed years of suspicious financial transactions and her growing conviction that Harold was being used as a front for illegal activity. Victor Hayes' name appeared on nearly every page. The sun had set hours ago, and I was starting to think this stakeout was pointless when I saw movement at the back of the house. A figure emerged from the rear entrance, not the main door that guests would use, but the service entrance that led through the kitchen. The outside lights caught him briefly, a tall, well-dressed man in his early 60s, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who didn't want to be noticed. I grabbed my phone and zoomed in, snapping several photos as he walked to a sleek black Mercedes parked in the shadows of the garage. The license plate was clear in 2 of the shots. As he drove past my position, heading away from the estate, I got a clear view of his profile. Victor Hayes. It had to be. I waited until his taillights disappeared before starting my own car. I didn't follow him. I wasn't equipped for that kind of surveillance, and I had what I needed. I had photos, a license plate, and confirmation that Victor Hayes was still very much involved with my family, still visiting Harold in secret, still pulling strings I couldn't yet see. Back at my apartment, I spent the next 3 hours researching everything I could find about Victor Hayes. His public image was impressive, a self-made real estate developer who'd built an empire over the past 30 years. His company, Hayes Development Group, had projects across 5 states. He sat on the boards of several charities. There were photos of him at galas, cutting ribbons at building openings, shaking hands with politicians. But when I dug deeper into archived news articles and business journals from 25 to 30 years ago, a different picture emerged. Victor Hayes had been Harold's business partner during a period when several of their joint ventures had attracted regulatory scrutiny. Nothing had ever been proven, no charges filed, but there were whispered allegations of bid-rigging zoning violations that somehow got overlooked, and investors who'd lost money while Hayes and Harold walked away unscathed. The partnerships had dissolved around the time I was born, according to public records, but clearly the relationship had continued in some form. A much more dangerous form if my mother's notes were accurate. The next morning, I went straight to Maxwell's office with my photos and research. He took one look at the images on my phone, and his expression hardened. "Victor Hayes," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Your mother was right to be concerned about him." He ushered me into his office and pulled out the thick file again, this time focusing on a section I hadn't examined closely before: pages of financial records covered in my mother's neat annotations. "Catherine spent the last year of her life investigating Victor's connection to your family," Maxwell explained, spreading the documents across his desk. "She believed he had excessive influence over Harold, not just business influence but genuine control. She suspected Harold was being used." "Used how?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "Money laundering." Maxwell pointed to a series of transactions highlighted in yellow. "Look at this pattern. Harold's company receives investments from what appear to be legitimate sources. The money flows through several accounts, gets mixed with Harold's actual business revenue, then flows out to Victor's projects looking clean. Your mother identified at least a dozen instances of this over a 5-year period before her death. She was building a case. Against Victor. Against both of them initially. But the more she investigated, the more she believed Harold was either too weak or too afraid to refuse Victor's demands. She wrote here." He pulled out a page filled with my mother's handwriting. Harold is not the mastermind. He's the tool. Victor has something on him, some leverage that keeps Harold compliant. I need to find out what it is before I can protect Brooke from whatever Victor is planning. The phrase, whatever Victor is planning, made my stomach drop. Planning. She thought he was planning something specific involving me. Maxwell hesitated, then nodded slowly. She believed Victor saw you as a potential problem. You were smart, educated, and morally upright, the kind of person who might eventually notice the financial irregularities if you ever got close enough to the family business. She thought Victor might try to discredit you, or worse, eliminate you as a threat before you could cause problems. My hands went cold. That's why she built the trust. She was protecting me from Victor. Exactly. Maxwell pulled out another document, this one a photocopy of what looked like an old newspaper clipping. But there's something else you need to understand about Victor Hayes. His connection to your family isn't just about business, it's personal. He slid a photograph across the desk. The image was faded, clearly decades old, showing 3 people at what looked like a college event or reunion. I recognized my mother immediately, even though she couldn't have been more than 22 or 23. She was laughing, vibrant, beautiful, in a way I'd only seen in old photos. Next to her stood a younger Harold, thinner and less assured than the man I knew. And on my mother's other side, standing so close that their shoulders touched, was a young Victor Hayes. He was looking at my mother with an expression that made everything suddenly horribly clear. This wasn't the look of a business associate or casual friend. This was the look of a man in love. Harold, by contrast, stood slightly apart from them both. His smile forced his posture stiff. He looked like someone who knew he was losing a competition he'd never had a chance of winning. Your mother knew Victor before she met Harold, Maxwell said quietly. I don't know all the details, but based on what Catherine wrote in her notes, they had a history, a romantic history, and when your mother chose Harold instead, he didn't need to finish the sentence. I stared at the photo, my mind reeling. Victor Hayes had been in love with my mother. She'd chosen Harold, and Victor had spent the next 30 years manipulating the man who'd won what he'd lost. Then I noticed something else in the photograph that made my heart stop completely. At the edge of the frame, partially cut off, stood a teenage girl. She was maybe 16 or 17, with Victor's hand resting protectively on her shoulder. The family resemblance was unmistakable, his daughter clearly. But that wasn't what made my breath catch. The girl looked exactly like Lucia. The same facial structure, the same distinctive features, the same eyes. Not similar, not merely reminiscent. Identical. Maxwell. I whispered, my voice barely audible. Who is that girl? That's Victor's daughter from his first marriage, Maxwell said, following my gaze. She died in a skiing accident in Europe about 25 years ago. Tragic. Victor never remarried after his wife left him, and after his daughter's death, he threw himself entirely into his business. But I couldn't stop staring at the photograph. The resemblance wasn't just striking, it was impossible to ignore. The same distinctive cheekbones, the same shape of the eyes, the same slight cleft in the chin that Lucia had always been self-conscious about. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and scrolled through my photos until I found one from Lucia's 30th birthday party 2 years ago, a rare family gathering I'd attended out of obligation. I held my phone next to Maxwell's photograph, comparing Victor's deceased daughter to my sister. They could have been the same person. Maxwell, I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. I need to see all the family photos my mother collected. Everything she saved. He understood immediately. Within minutes, he'd pulled out another folder, this one containing photocopies of family pictures my mother had apparently duplicated before her death. I spread them across his desk, my heart pounding as I examined images I'd seen 1,000 times but never really looked at. There was Lucia at 5 years old, gap-toothed and grinning at her kindergarten graduation. Harold stood beside her, but there was no resemblance between them. Harold had a broad, square face and deep-set eyes. Lucia's features were delicate, refined, nothing like his. Another photo, Lucia at 13, awkward and adolescent, standing between Harold and our mother at some family event. My mother's hand rested on Lucia's shoulder, but even in that casual touch, I could see tension. And Harold looked at Lucia with an expression I'd seen before, but never understood. Not quite love, not quite resentment, something uncomfortable and forced. Then there was the photo of all four of us taken when I was about 12, and Lucia was 9. My mother and I stood on one side, Harold and Lucia on the other. The divide was obvious, but what I'd never noticed before was how much I resembled Harold. We had the same square jaw, the same build, the same serious expression. I was his daughter in every visible way. Lucia looked like neither of our parents, or rather she looked like a parent who wasn't in the picture. I pulled up an image of Victor Hayes from a recent business article on my phone and placed it next to the childhood photos of Lucia. The resemblance was unmistakable. The shape of the face, the distinctive features, even the way they both tilted their heads slightly when they smiled. My God. Maxwell breathed, seeing what I saw. Your mother suspected this. I should have realized sooner. He rifled through the notes until he found a specific page dated about a year before my mother's death. He read aloud, Harold punishes Brooke for something she didn't do while raising Victor's child as his own. The irony is tragic. He cannot face what Victor took from him, so he destroys what is actually his. This is why Brooke must be protected. Harold's projection of his failures onto her will only intensify. She knew, I said numbly.
She knew Lucia was Victor's daughter. Maxwell nodded grimly. And she understood what it meant for you. Let me show you the timeline she reconstructed.
He pulled out several pages, clipped together a detailed chronology my mother had painstakingly assembled.
30 years ago, your mother and Victor were involved romantically. They'd known each other since college, and by all accounts, it was serious. But Victor was ambitious and struggling to establish himself in real estate. He had dreams, but no money, no connections, no guarantee of success. And then she met Harold, I said, already seeing where this was going. Harold came from old money, established family social connections, immediate financial security. Your mother made a practical choice. She chose stability over uncertainty. She married Harold. Maxwell paused, checking the dates. You were born a year later. By all accounts, those first few years of the marriage were reasonably happy. But Victor never forgot. He spent the next 10 years building his empire, becoming more successful than Harold could ever dream of being. And then, approximately 26 years ago, he reappeared in your parents' lives as Harold's business partner. I could picture it now, Victor, newly wealthy and powerful, walking back into my mother's life. Had it been calculated? Had he planned it as revenge? Or had he genuinely believed they could rekindle what they'd had? Your mother's notes suggest the affair happened during a particularly difficult period in her marriage, Maxwell continued carefully. Harold had made some bad business decisions, was drinking heavily, emotionally distant. Victor offered attention, understanding the passion of their youth. Whether it was manipulation on his part or genuine feeling, I can't say, but the affair happened and Lucia was conceived. Did Harold know? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Maxwell's expression was grim. Your mother believed he suspected from the beginning. Lucia was born 26 years ago, exactly 9 months after Victor's reappearance in their lives. The timing was impossible to ignore, but Harold never confronted it directly. He couldn't by then. Victor had financial leverage over him. The business partnerships were already established, and Harold was in too deep. Confronting the affair would have meant confronting everything else, the money laundering, the illegal deals, his own complicity. So he accepted Lucia as his daughter. More than that, he favored her, showered her with attention and resources, gave her everything she wanted. Maxwell met my eyes, but not out of love, out of desperate denial. If he could convince everyone, including himself, that Lucia was his beloved daughter, then the affair never happened. The betrayal wasn't real. His humiliation could be buried. and that's when the full psychological horror of my childhood clicked into place. He took all his rage and humiliation out on me instead. Yes, you were his actual biological daughter, the child who should have been precious to him. But every time he looked at you, he saw his own failure. You reminded him that his wife had chosen him once, but had returned to Victor anyway. You reminded him of his weakness, his inability to satisfy his wife, his role as Victor's puppet. Maxwell's voice softened with sympathy. So he projected everything onto you. He accused you of being another man's mistake, when that was actually true of Lucia. He treated you like you didn't belong when you were the only child who actually did. It's a textbook case of psychological projection taken to its cruelest extreme. I sat back in the chair, my mind reeling. 35 years of emotional abuse, and it had all been Harold's twisted way of avoiding the truth he couldn't face. He'd destroyed his relationship with his real daughter to protect the fiction that his fake daughter was real. The DNA test he'd demanded made horrible perfect sense now. He wanted proof that I wasn't his, so he could justify the way he'd treated me, could rewrite history to make his cruelty seem reasonable. He needed me to be the illegitimate child because if I was his and Lucia wasn't, then he'd have to confront what Victor had really taken from him. But I still don't understand something, I said, trying to work through the logic. If Victor got what he wanted, if he took my mother away from Harold, if Lucia is his daughter, then why has he spent 20 years destroying Harold's life? Why the money laundering scheme? Why the manipulation? If this was revenge, he already won. Maxwell's expression grew darker. That's the question your mother was trying to answer when she died. She wrote here. He pulled out the final page of notes dated just days before the accident. Victor's revenge isn't about winning Catherine back. It never was. It's about making Harold pay for having her in the first place. And it won't end until Harold has nothing left, which means it won't end until he loses everything, including Brooke. My blood ran cold. Victor sees me as something else Harold needs to lose. Your mother believed so. And if she was right... Maxwell didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. If Victor was Lucia's real father, and Harold knew it, and Victor had been systematically destroying Harold's life for the past 20 years, despite already having won the affair, then this wasn't about love or even business. This was about complete annihilation. And I was the final piece Harold had left to lose. I left Maxwell's office that afternoon feeling like I'd stepped into a reality I didn't fully understand yet. The revelation about Lucia's paternity, about Victor's long game of revenge, about my mother's investigation, it all swirled in my mind too big to fully process. I drove home on autopilot, my thoughts thousands of miles away, which is probably why I didn't notice the black SUV until it had been following me for several miles. It stayed 3 or 4 car lengths back, never getting too close, never falling too far behind. At first, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Lots of people drove black SUVs. The fact that it took the same exits I did, made the same turns, followed me all the way to my apartment complex that could be coincidence. But when I parked and glanced in my rearview mirror, I saw the SUV slow down, pause at the entrance to my complex, then drive away. Not park, not turn around. Just a slow, deliberate pause as if to make sure I knew it was there. My hands were shaking as I gathered my bag and hurried inside. The next morning, the SUV was parked across the street from my building. Same vehicle, same tinted windows, impossible to see who was inside. I took photos with my phone, capturing the license plate, then forced myself to go about my day as normally as possible. I had work to do, bills to pay, a life that couldn't stop just because someone was watching. But when I drove to the bank during my lunch break, the SUV followed. When I went to the grocery store that evening, it appeared in the parking lot, always at a distance, always visible. Never close enough to constitute a direct threat, but close enough to send a clear message: we know where you are. On the 3rd day, I went to the police. The officer who took my report was polite but skeptical. Has anyone approached you? Made direct threats? Attempted contact? No, but... Ma'am, I understand you're concerned, but without a direct threat or illegal activity, there's not much we can do. Lots of people have the same driving routes. Could be someone who lives in your area. For 3 days straight, following me to different locations. He gave me a sympathetic look that made my stomach sink. Unless they make contact or do something actionable, we can't intervene. I'd suggest varying your routine, being aware of your surroundings, maybe investing in a home security system. I left the police station feeling more alone than ever. I was being watched possibly by people connected to Victor Hayes, a man my mother believed was capable of murder, and the authorities couldn't do anything until something actually happened to me. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop asking questions about the past. Your mother didn't listen. Look what happened to her." I stared at the message, my blood running cold. This wasn't ambiguous. This was a direct threat, and more than that, it was a confirmation. My mother didn't listen. Look what happened to her. They were admitting as clearly as they dared that my mother's death hadn't been an accident. I screenshot the message immediately, then called the police again. Different officer, same response. "It's concerning, but there's no explicit threat. Look what happened isn't the same as this will happen to you. Without more concrete evidence, we can't trace the number or take action." "It's a burner phone anyway," I said, my voice hollow. "I already checked." That night, I barely slept. Every sound in my apartment building made me jump. Every car that drove past could be the SUV. I'd installed a chain lock on my door after the first day of surveillance, but it felt like inadequate protection against people who'd already proven they could reach me anywhere. At 2 a.m, I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. I woke 4 hours later to get ready for work and found an envelope on the floor just inside my door. Someone had slipped it underneath while I was sleeping. My hands shook as I picked it up. No markings, no address, just a plain manila envelope that had been pushed through the gap under my door sometime in the dark hours of the morning. Someone had been right outside my apartment. Had they tried the knob? Had they stood there listening to me breathe? Inside was a single photograph, and the moment I saw it, I had to sit down on the floor before my legs gave out. It was my mother's car. The wreckage from 8 years ago, twisted metal and shattered glass, photographed from an angle that showed the full extent of the destruction. I'd never seen the accident scene photos Harold had shielded me from them, one of the few mercies he'd ever shown, but I recognized my mother's car from the distinctive color and the bumper stickers she'd never removed. On the back of the photo, written in red ink that looked disturbingly like blood, were 8 words: "Accidents happen to women who dig too deep." I called Maxwell immediately, not caring that it was barely 6 a.m. He answered on the second ring alert and concerned. "Brooke, what's wrong?" I told him everything: the surveillance, the text message, the photograph. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Come to my office," he said finally. "Bring everything. Don't go to work today. We need to talk about how to keep you safe." 2 hours later, I sat in Maxwell's office with the photograph screenshots of the messages and photos of the SUV spread across his desk. He studied everything with the careful attention of someone who understood we were dealing with professionals. "This is sophisticated intimidation," he said quietly. "They're careful not to cross legal lines while making their message absolutely clear." The surveillance. The untraceable messages the photograph delivered physically, these are tactics designed to terrorize you into silence without providing evidence the police can act on. "It's working," I admitted. "I'm terrified." "Good," Maxwell said, and when I looked at him in shock, he clarified. "Not that you're afraid, that's unfortunate, but reasonable. Good that you recognize the danger and came to me instead of trying to handle this alone. Now we make sure you're protected." Over the next 3 hours, we implemented a comprehensive safety protocol. Maxwell had contacts, investigators, security experts, people who knew how to deal with situations like this. Together, we created multiple copies of all the documents my mother had left, distributing them to different secure locations, a safety deposit box in another city, Maxwell's office vault, a trusted colleague of his who specialized in whistleblower cases, More importantly, we set up what Maxwell called a dead man's switch. I recorded a detailed video log explaining everything I'd discovered: Victor's connection to my family, the evidence of money laundering, my mother's investigation, the suspicious circumstances of her death. I uploaded copies to 3 different cloud storage services, with instructions to automatically send the files to a list of recipients' law enforcement contacts. Maxwell trusted investigative journalists, even the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, if I didn't log in and reset the timer every 72 hours. "If anything happens to you," Maxwell explained, "if you're incapacitated or worse, these documents and your testimony will automatically be distributed. You become more dangerous to them dead than alive." I started recording daily video logs as well, documenting each development in my investigation, each threat I received, each piece of evidence I uncovered. The act of speaking directly to the camera, of stating clearly what was happening and who I believed was responsible, made me feel less powerless. "Let them watch," I told Maxwell as we finished the final setup. "Let them try to intimidate me. They've just proven that my mother was right about everything, and now I have even more reason to expose them." But I should have known that Victor Hayes hadn't survived 30 years of criminal enterprise by being predictable. The threats and surveillance had been just the opening move, testing my resolve, gauging my resources. The next attack came from a direction I never saw coming, and it proved that Victor understood the most effective way to hurt me wasn't through fear, it was through the people I was already trying to protect. My phone rang at 11 that night. Harold's name appeared on the screen, and everything inside me went cold with premonition. "Brooke." Harold's voice on the phone was barely recognizable, thin-strained, nothing like the authoritative tone I'd grown up fearing. "I need to see you. Tonight. Please." "It's 11 o'clock, I said, my guard immediately up. After everything I'd learned, I wasn't about to rush into meeting the man who'd tormented me for 35 years, especially not at his convenience. "I know. I'm sorry. But I'm outside your building and I need to talk to you. It's important. It's about Victor." The mention of Victor's name made my decision. "I'll be down in 5 minutes." When I stepped outside, I barely recognized the man waiting by the entrance. Harold looked like he'd aged a decade in the few days since I'd seen him. His hair was uncombed, his face drawn and gray, and he wore casual clothes I'd never seen him in before. Jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt, as if he'd dressed in the dark. But it was his eyes that shocked me most. They were frightened. Harold Sinclair. The man who'd ruled his household with cold authority my entire life looked genuinely terrified. "Thank you for coming down," he said, glancing around the parking lot as if expecting someone to leap out of the shadows. "Can we walk? I don't want to talk here." "Where do you want to go?" "There's a park 2 blocks away. Public space. Open." He was already moving, and something about his urgency made me follow. We walked in silence until we reached the small neighborhood park, empty at this hour, except for the distant sound of traffic. The streetlights cast long shadows across the playground equipment, and Harold kept checking over his shoulder as if we were being followed. His paranoia was palpable, and it frightened me almost as much as the threats I'd received. Finally, he stopped near a bench but didn't sit. He stood there, hands shoved in his pockets, looking at the ground, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something I should have told you years ago. I've been a coward and a fool, and you paid the price for both." I waited, hardly breathing. This was not the Harold I knew. 20 years ago," he began, his voice shaking. "Victor Hayes came to me with documents, a DNA test. He said your mother had confessed to having an affair with him, and that you weren't my biological daughter. You were his child." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd already suspected something like this. Hearing it out loud, hearing Harold finally admit why he'd treated me the way he had, was different from theorizing about it in Maxwell's office. "The test results looked legitimate," Harold continued, still not meeting my eyes. "Official laboratory letterhead, detailed genetic analysis, everything. Victor said Catherine had come to him guilt-ridden and admitted the truth. He said she wanted me to know before you got older, before you started looking more like him. He showed me comparison photos, genetic markers, percentages, terms I didn't fully understand but looked convincing. And you just believed him? The question came out harsher than I'd intended, but I couldn't help it. You never asked Mom, never verified it independently. I was devastated, Harold said. And for the first time since I'd known him, his voice cracked with genuine emotion. I thought the woman I loved had betrayed me. I thought every time I looked at you, I was looking at evidence of her infidelity of Victor's triumph. And Victor, God, the way he presented it, he wasn't gloating. He seemed sympathetic, almost apologetic. He said he was telling me because he respected me, because I deserved to know the truth about my own household. He finally looked at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. Every time you achieved something, every time you smiled, every time you looked at me with those eyes that reminded me of Catherine, when I first met her, I saw Victor's face. I saw the affair. I saw my own failure as a husband. And I hated you for it. God help me, Brooke. I hated you because I couldn't face hating your mother. Why didn't you confront her? Why didn't you demand she confirm it? Victor told me Catherine had made him promise never to tell me. He said she wanted to keep the family together even if it was based on a lie. He said if I confronted her, she'd deny everything to protect you and the family would tear apart. He had me trapped, don't you see? If I revealed what I knew, I'd destroy the marriage and the business, because by then Victor had financial hooks into everything I owned. If I stayed silent, I could maintain the appearance of a family, even if it was poisoned from within. The twisted logic of it was horrifying. Victor had crafted a perfect psychological trap, one that would make Harold torture his own daughter while thinking he was the wounded party. So you took it out on me, I said quietly. For 20 years. I know, Harold whispered. I know, and I can never undo it. I can never give you back the childhood I destroyed, the confidence I shattered, the love I should have given you. I stayed silent and let my resentment poison everything between us. Victor said if I ever revealed the DNA results, he'd expose other things, financial irregularities, business deals that would send me to prison. So I lived with the lie and made you live with the consequences. I pulled out my phone and showed him the documents Maxwell had given me, copies of the real DNA test my mother had conducted before her death, the one proving conclusively that I was Harold's biological daughter. Victor lied to you, Dad. He fabricated that test to psychologically torture you, to make you abuse your own child for 20 years. I am your daughter. I always was. And he wanted you to destroy your relationship with me as revenge for Mom choosing you over him. Harold stared at the documents, his face going white in the streetlight. His hands trembled as he took my phone, reading the results over and over as if they might change. No, he breathed. No, that's not, he wouldn't. He did. That's who Victor Hayes is. He didn't just want to hurt you financially. He wanted to make you destroy everything good in your life with your own hands. And it worked. Harold sank onto the bench and I watched a man completely break apart. His shoulders shook with sobs, his face buried in his hands, and the sounds he made were raw and animal. This wasn't the composed, cold authority figure who'd raised me. This was a broken man, finally seeing the full extent of how thoroughly he'd been manipulated. I destroyed my own daughter, he kept repeating. My own daughter. 20 years. Oh God, Brooke, what have I done? I didn't comfort him. I couldn't. Part of me felt sympathy for the victim he'd been, but a larger part remembered the cruel words, the dismissals, the birthday humiliation. He'd been manipulated, yes, but he'd also made choices. He could have verified. He could have confronted my mother. He could have treated me with basic kindness, even if he'd doubted our relationship. He'd chosen cruelty instead. We sat in silence for a long time, Harold crying me, processing everything he'd told me. Finally, he looked up at me with red, devastated eyes and asked the question I'd been dreading, the one that confirmed my worst fears. If Victor did that to me, Harold whispered, his voice breaking, if he's that calculating, that cruel, that patient, do you think he killed your mother too? Harold's question hung in the cold night air between us. "Do you think he killed your mother too?" The words I'd been avoiding, thinking directly the conclusion I'd been circling around since I found my mother's letter, now spoken aloud by the man who'd been too afraid to voice it for 8 years. "Tell me what you remember about the day she died," I said quietly. Harold took a shuddering breath, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "The night before the accident, Catherine told me she'd discovered something. She'd been investigating Victor's business dealings for months. I knew she was looking into things, but I didn't realize how deep she'd gone. That night she was frightened but determined. She said she had evidence of illegal activities that could send Victor to prison. Money laundering, fraud, things I didn't want to hear about because I knew how entangled I was in it all." "Did she tell you what specifically she'd found?" "Financial records, shell companies, transactions that proved Victor was using my legitimate businesses to clean money from God knows where. She'd been copying documents, tracking patterns, building a case. She told me she had an appointment the next morning with someone who could help, a federal investigator maybe, or a prosecutor. She wouldn't tell me exactly who, said it was safer if I didn't know." He looked at me with haunted eyes. "She asked me if I'd be willing to testify if it came to that. If I'd be willing to face the consequences for my part in Victor's schemes. I told her I needed time to think about it. That was the last real conversation we ever had. And the next morning, she left early, kissed me goodbye. I was still in bed pretending to be asleep because I was too much of a coward to face her after what she'd asked me. 2 hours later, the police called. Single car accident on Route 47, lost control on a curve. They said it was quick, that she probably didn't suffer." His voice broke. "The brakes had just been serviced the week before. I'd taken the car in myself because Catherine mentioned it was making a strange noise. The mechanic said everything was fine, gave me a full report. And then a week later, the brakes fail on a road she'd driven 1,000 times. The coincidence was too perfect, too convenient." "You suspected Victor immediately?" "I knew," Harold corrected. "But I couldn't prove anything, and Victor made sure I understood what would happen if I tried. He came to the house the day after the funeral, expressed his condolences, told me how tragic it was that Catherine had been distracted lately, stressed, not paying attention to road conditions the way she should have. He mentioned that grief could make people do irrational things, make accusations they couldn't support, and that it would be terrible if Catherine's memory was tarnished by wild conspiracy theories. I understood the threat. I pulled out my phone and called Maxwell, not caring that it was nearly midnight. He answered immediately, and I explained where I was and what Harold had just told me. "Bring him to my office first thing tomorrow morning," Maxwell said without hesitation. "We need to document everything while it's fresh, and there are files Catherine left that Harold needs to see." The next morning, the three of us sat in Maxwell's office while he spread out the accident investigation files my mother had somehow obtained before her death. She'd been thorough, documenting not just her own investigation into Victor, but also gathering information about what would happen if something happened to her. "Your mother knew she was taking a risk," Maxwell explained, showing us a file labeled Contingency Accident Investigation. "She researched the likely scenario if Victor tried to harm her, and she documented everything she could in advance. Look at this." He pulled out a detailed analysis of the accident. "The crash occurred on October 28th, 8 years ago, at approximately 8:15 in the morning. The weather was clear and dry. Police reports confirm this. The road was Route 47, a well-maintained highway with no history of accidents on that particular stretch. Your mother had driven that route at least twice a week for years." "How did she crash?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. According to the police report, brake failure caused her to be unable to slow down approaching a curve. The car went off the road and struck a tree. But here's what suspicious witness statements mention: another vehicle in the area. A black sedan was seen behind your mother's car shortly before the accident. That vehicle left the scene and was never identified." Harold leaned forward. "The police never followed up on that. The investigation was perfunctory at best," Maxwell said, his voice tight with anger. The brake system was examined visually, but never forensically tested for signs of tampering. The case was ruled accidental within 48 hours. Most suspicious of all, the insurance investigation, which should have taken weeks, was closed within a week, and the claim was paid out in record time. Someone with significant influence made sure this case didn't receive scrutiny. "Victor," I said. "Almost certainly. Your mother was investigating his money laundering operation. She died the day before she planned to submit evidence to federal authorities. The timing is too convenient to be coincidence." "Can we prove any of this?" Harold asked desperately. "Can we reopen the investigation?" Maxwell hesitated. 8 years is a long time. Physical evidence would be gone. But I've located someone who might be able to provide testimony that at least raises questions. The mechanic who serviced your wife's car the week before the accident, he's retired now, but he agreed to speak with us. 2 days later, I drove to a modest house in the suburbs to meet Thomas Brennan, the mechanic who'd worked on my mother's car. He was in his 70s now, white-haired and stooped, but his eyes were sharp and troubled when he opened the door. "You look like your mother," he said quietly. "I've thought about her often over the years. Come in." We sat in his living room and he pulled out a folder he'd been keeping. "I saved my service records from that day. I don't usually keep records this long, but something about what happened bothered me enough that I held on to them." He showed me the detailed report. "Your mother's car was in perfect condition. The brake system was completely sound. I checked it thoroughly because she'd mentioned being concerned about a noise. Turned out to be nothing, just a loose heat shield. I fixed that, did a full inspection, and the car left my shop in excellent working order." "But something happened after that," I prompted. His expression darkened. 2 days later, a man came to the shop, well-dressed professional. He said he was from an insurance company doing a routine audit of recent service work. He asked very specific questions about your mother's car, what work had been done, had there been any brake issues, was the system original, or had components been replaced. He seemed particularly interested in the brake fluid reservoir and the ABS system. "Did he give you a name?" "He showed me an ID, but I don't remember the name. I do remember his face, though. When I heard about the accident a few days later, I tried to tell the police about this man, that someone had been asking detailed questions about the brake system just before it failed. They told me the case was already closed, that it was a tragic accident but not suspicious. They made it clear they weren't interested in hearing more." I showed him a photograph of Victor Hayes. "Was this the man?" He studied it carefully, then shook his head. "No, but he could have been one of this man's associates. Similar age, similar bearing, professional, someone used to getting what he wanted." It wasn't definitive proof, but it was another piece of the pattern, another thread connecting Victor to my mother's death. I thanked Thomas Brennan and left with copies of his service records. I was halfway home when my phone rang. Thomas's name appeared on the screen. "Miss Sinclair." His voice was shaking. "Someone broke into my house last night. I just got back from my daughter's and discovered it. They didn't take anything, not the TV, not my wife's jewelry, nothing. But there's a message on my answering machine. Just one sentence. Forget what you remembered." My blood ran cold. "Have you called the police?" "What's the point? They made it clear 8 years ago they weren't interested in the truth." He paused. "I'm sorry, Miss Sinclair. I want to help you, I do. But I'm an old man, and they just proved they know where I live. I can't testify. I can't be involved. Please don't contact me again." The line went dead, and I knew Victor had just erased another witness, not by killing him, but by terrifying him into silence. It was brilliant and brutal, and left no evidence that would hold up in court. But it also proved beyond any doubt that we were getting close to something Victor desperately wanted to keep hidden. I drove home from Thomas Brennan's neighborhood with my hands gripping the wheel too tightly, my mind racing. Victor had moved against the mechanic within hours of our conversation. How had he known? Had someone followed me there? Was Thomas's phone tapped? The speed of Victor's response suggested a level of surveillance and control that made my previous concerns feel naive. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, it was nearly dark. I was exhausted, running on adrenaline and fear, and I just wanted to get inside, lock the door, and figure out my next move. But when I reached my apartment and put my key in the lock, the door swung open before I could turn it. It had been unlocked. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to call the police, to do anything except walk into that apartment. But I could see light coming from inside, hear no sounds of movement, and something made me push the door open wider. A man sat in my living room armchair as if he'd been invited for tea. He was middle-aged, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit with the kind of grooming and bearing that suggested wealth and professional polish. He looked up when I entered, his expression pleasant and utterly calm, as if breaking into someone's apartment and waiting for them was the most natural thing in the world. "Miss Sinclair," he said, standing with practiced courtesy. "Thank you for joining me. I apologize for the intrusion, but I represent Mr. Hayes's interests, and we have some matters to discuss." I should have run. I should have screamed. Instead, I found myself stepping inside and closing the door behind me. Some part of my brain recognizing that whatever was about to happen had been carefully orchestrated, and fleeing wouldn't change that. "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping my distance from him. "My name isn't important. What is important is that Mr. Hayes is concerned about you." He gestured to the couch, inviting me to sit in my own home. I remained standing. "He's aware that you've been under considerable stress following your father's recent emotional outburst at your birthday dinner. DNA tests, family conflicts, these things can be overwhelming." The casual mention of the birthday dinner made my stomach drop. He'd been watching me that long or longer. "Mr. Hayes wanted me to convey his sympathy." The man continued, his tone remaining conversational and pleasant. "He also wanted you to know he's willing to help. Financial assistance, perhaps? Legal support? Whatever you might need to move forward with your life rather than dwelling on the past." "I don't need anything from Victor Hayes." "Everyone needs something, Miss Sinclair." He smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "For instance, I know you attended Columbia Law School, though you chose not to practice. I know your current salary at the consulting firm, quite modest really for someone of your education. I know you had coffee at Brewster's Cafe this morning at 7:30, and that you visited a retired mechanic named Thomas Brennan this afternoon at 3:15. The specificity of the information paralyzed me with fear. He knew my schedule down to the minute. He knew about Thomas Brennan just hours after our meeting. "Mr. Hayes has substantial resources," the man said, standing and buttoning his suit jacket. "He has friends in legal circles, in law enforcement, and the media. He's a respected businessman with an impeccable reputation, whereas your family is—" He paused delicately. "Shall we say troubled? Your father's business is failing. Your sister is financially dependent on others. And you've been making wild accusations about a man who's done nothing but try to help your family over the years." "My mother investigated Victor for money laundering," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "She was going to expose him, and then she died." The man's expression didn't change. "Your mother's curiosity led her down a path that ended unfortunately. People who chase ghosts sometimes have accidents of their own. It would be tragic if history repeated itself." The threat was implicit but clear. He'd just told me my mother was killed and that I could be next, all without saying anything that could be used against him in court. He placed a business card on my coffee table. Just a phone number, no name, no company. "If you'd like to discuss a financial settlement that would allow you to move forward with your life to find peace, Miss Sinclair, call this number. Mr. Hayes is a reasonable man. He prefers to solve problems through conversation rather than confrontation." Then he walked past me to the door, paused, and turned back. "I hope you make the wise choice. Your mother, unfortunately, did not." The door clicked shut behind him, and I stood frozen in my living room for a full minute before my legs gave out, and I sank onto the couch. I called Maxwell immediately, my voice shaking as I described what had just happened. "He was in my apartment, Maxwell. He knew everything, and he basically admitted Victor killed my mother." "But he didn't say anything actionable," Maxwell said grimly. "That's how they operate. Intimidation wrapped in civility threats, disguised as concern. Nothing you could take to the police." "What do I do?" "First, you need to check your apartment for surveillance. If they knew you went to Thomas Brennan's house within hours, they're monitoring you somehow." I hung up and immediately started searching. I didn't know what I was looking for at first, but then I spotted a tiny device no larger than a button attached inside my smoke detector. My hands shook as I examined it without touching it. Then I found another one disguised as part of my desk lamp's fixture. I called a security firm that specialized in counter-surveillance, and a technician arrived within the hour. He swept my entire apartment with equipment I didn't understand, and the grim expression on his face told me everything before he spoke. "You've got 4 devices," he said, showing me where each had been placed. Sophisticated equipment, voice-activated, transmitting to a remote receiver. Whoever installed these is a professional, not some amateur stalker. This is expensive tech, probably military grade. You're dealing with someone with serious resources and connections. How long have they been here? Hard to say definitively, but based on the battery levels, I'd estimate at least 2 to 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Every conversation with Maxwell, every phone call with Harold, every plan we'd made, every piece of evidence we'd discussed, Victor had heard all of it. He'd been 2 steps ahead the entire time because he'd been listening to us plan our moves. The technician removed the devices and did another sweep to make sure there weren't others. I'd also recommend checking your car, your office, anywhere you spend significant time, and assume your phone might be compromised too. After he left, I sat in my now supposedly secure apartment and tried to process the full scope of what Victor had done. This wasn't just intimidation. This was complete surveillance, total information dominance. He'd known about Thomas Brennan because he'd heard me discuss him with Maxwell. He'd known my schedule because he'd been tracking my movements. Every advantage I thought I had was actually an advantage for him. My phone rang. Maxwell's name appeared on the screen, and I almost didn't answer, wondering if even this call would be monitored. "Brooke?" His voice was tight with tension. "We have a serious problem. Someone sent me a package this morning. I just opened it and—" He paused, and I could hear him trying to steady his breathing. "It's a page from your mother's will. The original addendum, the one that was supposed to be locked in my vault. Someone got into my vault and photographed it." My blood turned to ice. If Victor could access Maxwell's secured vault, then nowhere was safe. Nothing was protected. We weren't just fighting a wealthy man with connections, we were fighting someone who had complete control over the very systems that were supposed to protect us. I was at Maxwell's office within 20 minutes, having driven through morning traffic with my heart pounding. He met me at the elevator, his usual composed demeanor completely shattered. I'd never seen him look rattled before, but now his tie was loosened, his hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. "Come," was all he said, leading me to his private office and locking the door behind us. On his desk sat an unmarked manila envelope. Next to it lay a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of what was clearly a handwritten document. My mother's distinctive cursive filled the page, and even from across the desk I recognized her handwriting. "This was delivered to the front desk this morning," Maxwell said, his voice tight. "No return address, no identifying marks, just my name on the envelope. When I opened it and saw what it was," he gestured at the paper helplessly. "Brooke, this is a photocopy of the codicil to your mother's will, the addendum she added in the final weeks of her life, the one that's supposed to be locked in my vault." I sank into the chair across from him. "Someone got into your vault." "That's what's impossible about this. That vault requires 2 forms of access, my personal code and a physical key held by bank security. Only 3 people have the combination: myself, my senior partner who's been with the firm for 30 years, and the head of bank security who manages the facility. The original document should be physically impossible to access without leaving a record. But someone did access it. Photographed it at minimum. They're sending us a message they can reach anything, penetrate any security access, any supposedly protected space." He pushed the photocopy toward me. "Read it. This is what your mother wrote in her final weeks." I picked up the paper with trembling hands. My mother's handwriting seemed to leap off the page, and I could almost hear her voice as I read the words she'd written 8 years ago. The codicil was dated October 12, 2017, just 2 weeks before her death. It began with legal language establishing this as an addendum to her existing will, then shifted into something more personal and urgent. If my death is ruled accidental but occurs during my investigation of Victor Hayes, the circumstances must be re-examined. I have documented evidence proving Victor's criminal enterprise, including money laundering, fraud, and manipulation of my husband, Harold Sinclair. Harold is a weak man, but not inherently evil. He has been coerced and manipulated. The evidence I've compiled should be turned over to federal authorities, not local police, as Victor has demonstrated connections at the state and local level that compromise those institutions. The next paragraph made my breath catch. I name my daughter Brooke Catherine Sinclair as the sole heir to my separate estate, valued at approximately $7 million, comprising investments, property, and trust funds inherited from my family. This estate is to be held in trust and released to Brooke when her legal status as Harold's biological daughter is confirmed through DNA testing. I specifically exclude Harold Sinclair and Lucia Sinclair from any claims to this estate. And then the lines that changed everything. Attached to this codicil are DNA test results proving Brooke's paternity. Harold Sinclair is her biological father, contrary to documents Victor Hayes provided to Harold approximately 20 years ago. Those documents were falsified by Victor as part of his campaign to psychologically torture Harold and destroy his relationship with his legitimate daughter. I had independent testing done through a certified laboratory, and the results are conclusive. Brooke is Harold's child. Victor's lie has poisoned our family for 2 decades, and I will not allow it to continue after my death. I read the words 3 times, tears blurring my vision. My mother had known everything. She'd understood Victor's manipulation, had proof of his crimes, and had taken concrete steps to protect me and expose the truth. The codicil was dated 2 weeks before she died. She'd been racing against time, knowing she was in danger, but determined to document everything before it was too late. "Where's the original?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Maxwell's expression darkened. "That's the problem. When I saw this photocopy, I immediately went to the vault to check the original. It should have been in the sealed file with the rest of your mother's estate documents." He paused, his jaw tight with anger. "The original codicil is gone. In its place is a forgery, a very good forgery, but still detectable under forensic analysis. The handwriting is similar but not exact. The paper is aged to look old, but the composition is wrong. Someone with vault access stole the original and replaced it with a fake." How long has it been gone?" "I don't know. I haven't personally checked that specific document in years. There was no reason to. It was supposed to be secure. But sometime between your mother's death and today, someone accessed the vault, located this specific document among hundreds of others, and executed a switch sophisticated enough that casual inspection wouldn't catch it." The implications were staggering. "Victor has someone inside your firm. Or inside the bank security." "Or both," Maxwell said grimly. "We're not just fighting Victor Hayes Brooke. We're fighting someone who has successfully infiltrated the very systems designed to protect people from men like him. He's bought or coerced people with access to legal documents, to security protocols, to law enforcement. The normal channels we'd use to fight him are compromised." I thought about the surveillance devices in my apartment, the man who'd sat in my living room knowing every detail of my life, the mechanic who'd been terrorized into silence within hours of speaking with me. Victor had built a network of control that seemed impossible to fight. "The photocopy they sent you," I said slowly. "It proves they have the original, doesn't it? They could only make this copy from the real document." "Exactly. Which means they could destroy it at any time. Once the original is gone, we'd be left with nothing but the forgery in the vault and this photocopy, which could be dismissed as fabricated. Your mother's final testimony, her documented proof, all of it could disappear as if it never existed. We need to find that original. But how Victor has it, presumably, or it's already destroyed." Maxwell ran his hand through his hair again, a gesture of frustration I'd never seen from him. "We need to think about who else might have seen it. Who would have had access during the estate reading 8 years ago?" I thought back to my mother's funeral, to the formal reading of her will in this very office. I'd been 27, devastated with grief, barely processing what was happening. Harold had been there, stone-faced and silent. Maxwell had read through the main provisions of the will. And someone else had been there too. Lucia, I said quietly. Lucia was at the estate reading. Maxwell's eyes widened. Yes, she was 18 at the time. I remember she asked questions about the trust provisions, seemed very interested in the financial details. Did she see the codicil? I read it aloud during the estate reading, that's standard practice. But I don't recall showing the physical document to anyone except... He stopped, his face going pale. Except Lucia specifically asked to see your mother's handwriting. She said she wanted to hold something her mother had written for comfort. I let her see the codicil for a few minutes before I returned it to the vault. Lucia had held my mother's final testament in her hands. Lucia, who'd been Victor's biological daughter all along. Lucia, who'd been positioned perfectly to memorize details, to photograph pages with a hidden camera, to provide Victor with exactly the information he'd need to forge a replacement. She's been working with him, I whispered. This whole time, Lucia's been working with Victor. I called Lucia that afternoon, my voice calm despite the fury churning inside me. We need to talk, today. Meet me at Bellini's at 6. There was a long pause on the other end. Brooke, I'm busy. Bellini's, 6 o'clock. If you're not there, I'll come to your condo and we'll have this conversation in front of your neighbors instead. I hung up before she could argue. Bellini's was an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place where Lucia felt comfortable and where a public scene would be socially unacceptable. She'd meet me there because her carefully constructed image mattered more to her than avoiding an uncomfortable conversation. I arrived early and chose a table in the center of the dining room, visible public but far enough from other diners that we could speak without being overheard. Lucia arrived exactly on time, dressed impeccably as always, in a designer dress and heels that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But as she approached the table, I noticed something I'd never seen before: uncertainty. Her usual confident stride was slightly off, and her smile looked forced. Brooke, she said, sitting down and immediately reaching for the water glass. What's this about? I have dinner plans later. Cancel them. I leaned forward, keeping my voice low but firm. 8 years ago, you were at Maxwell's office when Mom's will was read. You asked to see the codicil, the addendum she wrote before she died. You held it in your hands. What did it say? Lucia's face went carefully blank, the mask of a woman who'd learned to hide her reactions. I don't remember. It was 8 years ago and I was grieving. Don't lie to me, Lucia. Not anymore. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photocopy Maxwell had received. This document has disappeared from Maxwell's vault and been replaced with a forgery. Someone who saw the original could have provided details to create that forgery. You saw the original. I wouldn't. She stopped, her composure cracking slightly. Brooke, whatever you're investigating, whatever conspiracy theories you've come up with, I don't want to be involved. Victor Hayes, I said quietly, watching her face. The effect was immediate and undeniable. Lucia's carefully maintained composure shattered. Her face went pale and she gripped the edge of the table. Don't, she whispered urgently. Don't drag me into whatever you're doing with Victor. You don't understand what he's capable of. You think Harold is difficult, Victor is... She stopped, glancing around as if afraid he might somehow hear us even here. He's your biological father, isn't he? Lucia closed her eyes, and for a moment I saw past the designer clothes and perfect hair to something vulnerable underneath. When she opened her eyes again, they were wet with unshed tears. How long have you known? I asked more gently. Since I was 20. Victor told me himself. Her voice was barely audible. He showed me DNA results, explained that he and Mom had been in love before she married Harold. He made it sound romantic, like some great tragic love affair. He said Mom chose Harold because he was weak and offered security, but that she'd realized her mistake and come back to Victor. He painted himself as the wronged party, the man who truly loved her, while Harold was just a means to an end. And you believed him? I was 20 years old, Brooke. I'd grown up watching Harold be cold to you and warm to me, and I didn't understand why. When Victor explained it that I was his daughter, that Harold knew but couldn't admit it, suddenly everything made sense. Why Harold favored me. Why he hated you. Victor said you reminded Harold of his failures, while I reminded him of what he could pretend was still a happy family. The waiter appeared, and we both ordered wine we didn't want just to make him leave. When he was gone, Lucia continued, her voice trembling. Victor started supporting me financially after he told me the truth. The boutique startup money, the condo, the car. Harold thought it was family money I'd inherited from Mom. But it was Victor. He said he wanted to take care of his daughter since he couldn't claim me publicly. For years, I thought he was being generous, being a real father. I didn't understand he was buying my silence. You helped him, didn't you? With the codicil? Lucia shook her head frantically. I didn't mean to. I didn't know what he was planning. He asked me about the estate reading, said he wanted to understand what provisions Mom had made since he'd cared about her so much. I told him what I remembered. I described the codicil, mentioned that it named you as sole heir, that it talked about DNA results proving you were Harold's daughter. I thought I was just sharing family information with someone who'd loved my mother. Did you photograph it? No. I swear, Brooke, I didn't. But She stopped, looking ashamed. I told Victor everything I could remember about what was written. I was detailed because he seemed so interested, so caring. I didn't realize I was giving him exactly what he needed to create a forgery. I wanted to be angry, but looking at my sister's face, I saw someone who'd been manipulated just as thoroughly as Harold had been. Victor had played on her insecurities, her desire to feel special, her need to understand her place in the family. He'd groomed her from age 20, building dependence and loyalty, while positioning himself as her protector. There's something else, Lucia said quietly. Something I've never told anyone. A few weeks before Mom died, I was home from college for fall break. I came home late one night and heard voices in the garage. Mom and Victor were arguing. My pulse quickened. What were they saying? I couldn't hear everything, but Victor was furious. Really furious in a way that scared me. He said something about Mom making a terrible mistake, about how she didn't understand what she was doing. And Mom, Lucia's voice cracked. Mom said, I won't let you use my children as pawns anymore. I'm going to the authorities and there's nothing you can do to stop me. What did Victor say? He said, if you go to the authorities, I'll make sure Harold and your daughters pay the price. You think you can expose me and walk away? You think I'll let you destroy everything I've built? Mom's voice got really quiet then, but I heard her say, I'm not afraid of you anymore, Victor. I felt cold all over. You heard him threaten her. You heard him threaten us. And you never told anyone. Tears were streaming down Lucia's face now. A week later, she was dead. And Victor came to me at the funeral. He took me aside and said, I hope you understand that sometimes people make dangerous choices and face dangerous consequences. I'd hate to see anyone else in your family make those same mistakes. I understood the threat. If I said anything about what I'd heard, I'd be next. Lucia, do you have any proof of this conversation? She looked at me for a long moment, then slowly pulled out her phone. I recorded it. I was scared something bad would happen, so I turned on my phone's voice recorder before they realized I was there. I've kept it all these years, too afraid to delete it, too afraid to share it. She played the recording, and I heard my mother's voice for the first time in 8 years, strong and defiant in the face of Victor's threats. The rage in Victor's voice was terrifying, barely controlled violence wrapped in words. When my mother said she wasn't afraid of him, there was a long pause, and then Victor's reply chilled me to the bone. Then you're a fool, Catherine. Fools who threaten me tend to have very short lifespans. Days later, my mother was dead. Why are you showing me this now? I asked Lucia. Because I'm tired of being afraid, she whispered. Because Victor has been controlling me for 12 years, and I'm finally realizing that what I thought was love was just another form of manipulation. Because you're my sister, and I've treated you terribly, and maybe it's time to do the right thing, even if it costs me everything. I reached across the table and took her hand. We can protect you. Maxwell knows people, federal contacts who can't be bought. You don't understand, Lucia interrupted. Victor has people everywhere. The man who broke into your apartment, the surveillance devices. That's just what you found. You have no idea how deep his control goes. We talked for another hour, Lucia showing me text messages and emails that documented years of Victor's financial support and subtle manipulation. By the time we left the restaurant, I had the recording transferred to my phone and copies uploaded to 3 different secure locations. Thank you, I told Lucia as we stood outside. I know this wasn't easy. She nodded, still looking frightened, but also somehow lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. Be careful, Brooke. Victor doesn't lose, he doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget. I watched her walk to her car, feeling a complicated mix of anger at her years of complicity and sympathy for how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. She'd been groomed by Victor since she was 20, fed a narrative that justified his control while masking it as love and protection. What I didn't see as I turned to walk to my own car was Lucia sitting in her Mercedes for a long moment before pulling out her phone. I didn't see her hands shake as she dialed a number. And I didn't hear her whisper into the phone, her voice breaking. She knows everything. She has the recording. I'm sorry I tried to, please don't hurt her. She's my sister. I spent the next 2 days organizing everything Lucia had given me. The recording of Victor threatening my mother was damning, but I needed to build a complete case. Financial records, witness statements, the timeline of events. Maxwell and I worked methodically, preparing to approach federal authorities with a package too comprehensive to ignore. On the second evening, I drove home exhausted, but cautiously hopeful. We were close. Victor had made mistakes, left evidence, and now his own daughter had turned against him. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we might actually win. The first sign something was wrong was my apartment door. It stood slightly ajar, light spilling into the hallway from inside. My heart immediately started pounding. I pulled out my phone finger, hovering over 911, and pushed the door open wider. The devastation inside took my breath away. My apartment had been systematically destroyed. Furniture was overturned, cushions slashed, books swept from shelves. But this wasn't random vandalism or a burglary. My television still hung on the wall. My jewelry box sat untouched on the dresser. This was targeted personal destruction designed to send a message. Papers were scattered everywhere, copies of my mother's documents, though the originals were safely stored elsewhere. My laptop lay on the floor screen, shattered hard drive, presumably destroyed. Kitchen cabinets hung open, dishes smashed. But the worst was my bedroom. On the wall above my bed, someone had spray painted in red letters 2 feet high, "Last warning." I stood frozen, phone in hand, trying to process the violation of my personal space, the clear escalation from surveillance and threats to physical destruction. Then I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, a weak, pained meow from the bathroom. Shadow. I ran to the bathroom and found my cat, a gray tabby my mother had given me 10 years ago, lying on the floor, barely moving. There was vomit near her, and her breathing was labored. I scooped her up, grabbed my keys, and ran to my car, already calling the emergency vet as I drove. The vet confirmed what I'd feared: Shadow had been poisoned, likely with antifreeze mixed into something appealing. "You got her here just in time," the vet said grimly. "Another hour and she wouldn't have made it. We'll need to keep her for a few days, but she should recover." I sat in the vet's waiting room, shaking with rage and fear. Victor had been in my home. He'd touched my things, destroyed my space, and poisoned an innocent animal, my mother's last gift to me, to prove he could hurt anything I loved. This wasn't just a warning. This was a promise of escalation. My phone rang. Harold's name appeared, and his voice when I answered was broken in a way I'd never heard before. Brooke, it's over. Victor's called in all the loans, every single one. I have 48 hours to repay debts I can't possibly cover. The business, the house, everything, it's all going to be seized. I'm going to lose everything. What are you talking about? The loan agreements I signed years ago with Victor's companies, he structured them so he could demand immediate repayment at any time. I thought they were standard business loans, but my lawyer just reviewed them. They're perfectly legal, and they're designed to give Victor the power to destroy me whenever he wants. He's exercising that power now. I closed my eyes, understanding immediately. This is because of me. Because I'm investigating him. He called me an hour ago. Harold said, his voice hollow. He said, "Your daughter is making poor choices, Harold. Perhaps if she sees what those choices cost the people around her, she'll reconsider." Then he hung up and had his lawyers serve me with repayment demands. 48 hours, Brooke. After that, I'm bankrupt. For the first time in my life, I heard Harold Sinclair sound truly defeated. Not angry, not authoritative, just broken. And despite everything he'd done to me, despite the 35 years of cruelty, I felt a flash of sympathy. He'd been Victor's victim long before I was. Victor had been systematically destroying him for decades, and now he was finishing the job to get to me. "Don't give up," I said, though I had no idea how to stop what Victor had set in motion. "Let me talk to Maxwell. There has to be something—" "Maybe you should stop Brooke," Harold interrupted. "Maybe we should just accept things. Victor is too powerful, too connected. Your mother tried to fight him, and look what happened. Now he's coming after you, after me, after everyone who stands in his way. Maybe survival means knowing when you've lost." I hung up and immediately called Maxwell. "Victor's escalating. He trashed my apartment, poisoned my cat, and just destroyed Harold's business. We need to move. Now go to the authorities before— You need to leave your apartment immediately." Maxwell cut me off. "Don't go back there. The poisoned cat was a test, Brooke. Next time it won't be an animal. Pack a bag if you haven't already, and meet me at this address." He gave me directions to a property outside the city. "It's a secure location, a friend's vacation house that's currently vacant. You'll be safe there while we figure out our next move." "I can't just hide." "You can't fight from a hospital bed or worse," Maxwell said firmly. "Victor is done playing games. He's showing you what he's capable of, and trust me, this is just the beginning. Move to the safe house tonight. We'll regroup in the morning." I picked up Shadow from the vet the next day and drove to the address Maxwell had given me. The house was an hour outside the city, a modest cabin on a wooded property with no neighbors in sight. It was isolated, quiet, and felt like a prison despite Maxwell's assurances that it was for my protection. I spent the next 2 days there, Shadow recovering slowly, me going through my mother's documents and trying to build our case while jumping at every sound. Maxwell visited once, bringing supplies and updates. Harold's business had officially filed for bankruptcy. Lucia had gone silent, not returning my calls. The mechanic who'd testified about my mother's car had moved to another state without leaving a forwarding address. Victor was systematically dismantling every piece of our opposition, isolating me, cutting off potential allies, demonstrating his absolute control. I felt the weight of it pressing down on me, the fear, the isolation, the growing certainty that my mother had been right to be terrified of this man. This was my lowest point. Alone in a safe house, my father's life in ruins, my sister too scared to help witnesses disappearing, and a man with unlimited resources determined to silence me permanently. I sat on the cabin's porch that evening, watching the sun set through the trees, and wondered if Harold was right. Maybe survival meant knowing when you'd lost. Then I remembered my mother's letter. "You're stronger than all of them combined. Remember that." She'd known this would be hard. She'd known Victor would fight back, but she'd also believed I could win, or she wouldn't have left me the tools to fight. I wouldn't give up. I couldn't. Not after everything my mother had sacrificed to give me this chance. That night I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line, just an attachment. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was a forwarded email chain messages between Maxwell and someone whose name was redacted, discussing the Sinclair situation, and ensuring the client's interests are protected. The language was vague, corporate, but one line made my blood run cold. We need to contain this before it reaches federal attention. The longer she pursues this, the more complicated it becomes for everyone involved. I read it 3 times, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. Was Maxwell protecting me, or was he protecting Victor? Had I been trusting the very person who was working against me? I stared at that email for hours, reading and rereading the forwarded thread, until my eyes burned. Containing the Sinclair situation. Ensuring the client's interests are protected. Who was the client? Me or Victor Maxwell had been my mother's lawyer, her trusted confidant, the man who'd claimed to be waiting 8 years for me to walk through his door. But he'd also had access to every piece of evidence, every plan, every move I'd made. If Victor wanted to neutralize me, buying off the one person I trusted completely would be brilliant strategy. I mentally reviewed every interaction with Maxwell. He'd locked his office door when showing me documents. Was that for privacy or to prevent witnesses? He'd insisted I move to this isolated safe house. Was it for my protection or to keep me contained and monitored? He'd been the one to tell me about the vault breach, but what if he'd orchestrated it himself? The paranoia was exhausting, but I couldn't shake it. Trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. By dawn, I'd made a decision. I needed someone independent, someone Victor couldn't have gotten to, someone with the skills to verify what my mother's documents actually proved. I scrolled through my contacts and found a name I hadn't called in 3 years. Rebecca Chen, a forensic accountant I'd worked with at my consulting firm. We'd collaborated on a fraud investigation that had saved our client millions. She was brilliant, discreet, and she owed me a favor. "Brooke Sinclair," Rebecca said when she answered, surprise evident in her voice. "It's been forever. What's going on?" "I need help. Off the books. It's complicated and possibly dangerous." There was a pause then. "You've got my attention. What do you need?" I drove to Rebecca's office that afternoon, bringing copies of the financial documents my mother had compiled. I didn't mention Maxwell didn't tell her about the investigation beyond the basics. My mother had suspected money laundering. I was trying to verify her suspicions, and I needed an expert analysis. Rebecca spread the documents across her conference table, and I watched her expression shift from curious to focused to genuinely alarmed as she worked through the numbers. "This is sophisticated," she said after 2 hours. "Whoever set this up understood exactly how to exploit legitimate business structures for illegal purposes." She pointed to a series of transactions. "Look at this pattern. Victor Hayes's companies make what appear to be legitimate investments in your father's business. The money flows in, gets mixed with actual revenue from Harold's operations, then flows back out to different Hayes entities as consulting fees or management services. It's textbook money laundering." "Can you prove it?" "With these documents, absolutely. Your mother documented transactions going back 20 years. The pattern is undeniable." Rebecca pulled up a spreadsheet she'd created. "But here's what's interesting. Some of these documents have Harold's signature authorizing the transactions. But I'd bet money that if you had these signatures forensically analyzed, you'd find at least some are forgeries." I leaned forward. "What makes you say that?" "The pen pressure is inconsistent. The signature slant varies. These look like they were signed by the same person but under different circumstances, some confident, some hesitant, some that look traced. If Harold signed some of these under duress or manipulation and others were forged entirely, it changes his culpability significantly." The implications hit me hard. Harold had participated in Victor's scheme, yes, but perhaps not willingly. Perhaps he'd signed a few documents 20 years ago, not understanding what he was agreeing to, and Victor had used those signatures as templates to forge others. It would explain why Harold seemed weak rather than evil, manipulated rather than mastermind. "What happens if this goes to federal prosecutors?" I asked. Rebecca's expression turned serious. "Victor Hayes goes to prison for decades. Money laundering on this scale, maintained over 20 years, involves multiple federal crimes. But Harold," she hesitated, Even if some signatures are forged, he'd still face criminal exposure. At minimum, he was negligent. More likely, prosecutors would view him as a co-conspirator, even if he was coerced. I sat back processing this. The financial evidence was my nuclear option proof that could destroy Victor completely. But using it would also destroy my father, a man who'd tormented me for decades, but who was ultimately another of Victor's victims. Did I sacrifice Harold to get Victor? Or was there a way to use this as leverage without triggering the mutual destruction it represented? I need to think about how to use this, I told Rebecca. Can you keep this analysis confidential for now? Of course. But Brooke, if even half of what you've told me is true, you're dealing with someone incredibly dangerous. Be careful. I returned to the safe house as evening fell, my mind churning with strategy. The financial evidence gave me power, but wielding it carelessly could hurt the wrong people. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to use this leverage without becoming the villain in my own story. My phone rang at 9 p.m. Maxwell's name appeared on the screen and every instinct told me not to answer, but I did, keeping my voice neutral. "Brooke," he said, and I immediately heard the tension in his voice. "We have a serious problem. My firm's document storage facility was broken into last night. They didn't take everything, just files related to your mother's estate case. Everything we had stored, gone." My heart sank even as my suspicion of Maxwell intensified. Was this real, or was this him covering his tracks? How is that possible? I don't know. The facility has security cameras, but somehow they accessed our specific storage unit and took only your mother's files. Nothing else was touched. His voice dropped. "Brooke, we need to meet. There's something else I need to tell you about that email you received." "What do you need to tell me about that email?" I asked, gripping the phone tighter. "Not over the phone," Maxwell said. "Can you meet me at the safe house in an hour? I need to show you something, and we need to talk about what happens next." He arrived exactly an hour later, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, his tie was missing, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept. "The storage facility break-in happened between 2 and 4 a.m. last night," he said, settling into the cabin's small living room. "The facility has cameras, security guards, biometric locks on every storage unit. It should have been impossible. But the security footage from that time window is corrupted. The system was undergoing routine maintenance scheduled by someone with administrative access. The maintenance created a 2-hour window where the cameras weren't recording. During that window, someone accessed our specific storage unit and took only files related to your mother's estate. They left thousands of other documents untouched. The precision of it was chilling. They knew exactly where to look, down to the specific box and file numbers. Whoever did this had inside information about our storage system, our security protocols, and exactly what they were looking for." Maxwell pulled out his tablet and showed me the security logs. "Look at this. The biometric scan that accessed our unit was registered to a maintenance worker who doesn't exist. The ID was created 3 weeks ago, authorized by someone in the facility's management, and used exactly once last night. Victor has someone inside the security company, or inside my firm, or both." Maxwell's voice was tight with frustration. "He's thought of everything, Brooke. The physical evidence your mother left, the original documents, the handwritten notes, everything that would have been admissible in court, it's gone." I studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, any indication that this was an elaborate performance. The email I'd received still haunted me. "Maxwell, I need to ask you something directly. Are you working for Victor?" He didn't look surprised by the question. Instead, he looked almost relieved that I'd finally asked it. "I wondered when you'd bring that up. You received an email, didn't you? A forwarded thread discussing the Sinclair situation." "How did you know?" "Because Victor sent you that email, Brooke. He wanted you to doubt me, to fracture the one alliance he couldn't buy or intimidate. It's brilliant, really make you question your own lawyer while he systematically destroys your evidence." Maxwell leaned forward, his expression intense. "Let me tell you something I haven't told anyone. 6 months ago, before you ever walked into my office, Victor Hayes approached me. It was at a charity gala, all very civilized, very public. He pulled me aside and made me an offer. What kind of offer? A substantial sum of money. He said he'd heard I was the attorney for Catherine Sinclair's estate, and he wanted to be informed if any of Catherine's children ever came asking questions. He framed it as concern for old friends, said he wanted to help the family through difficult times. He offered me $200,000 just to alert him if you or Lucia ever appeared. I felt sick. What did you say? I told him to go to hell. Maxwell's jaw tightened. Your mother was my client and my friend. She trusted me with her final wishes because she knew I couldn't be bought. I may have many faults, Brooke, but I don't betray the dead. After Victor's approach, I increased security protocols, moved the most sensitive documents to the supposedly high-security storage facility, and waited to see what his next move would be. This break-in, this is his retaliation for my refusal. How do I know you're telling the truth? You don't. Not with absolute certainty. But think about it logically. If I were working for Victor, why would I have given you your mother's letter in the first place? Why would I have shown you the financial records introduced you to her entire investigation? I could have simply told you there was no estate, destroyed the documents myself, and you'd never have known the truth existed. He had a point. If Maxwell were compromised, he could have neutralized me months ago with far less effort. The email you received was crafted to sound incriminating while remaining ambiguous, Maxwell continued. Containing the Sinclair situation, meaning containing Victor's attempt to intimidate you. Ensuring the client's interests are protected, meaning protecting you, my client. But worded carefully to make you doubt everything. Victor is a master manipulator. This is what he does. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him because if I couldn't trust Maxwell, I had no one left. Show me proof. Show me something that proves Victor approached you. Maxwell pulled up his phone and showed me a series of text messages from a number I recognized, the same number on the business card Victor's representative had left in my apartment. The messages were dated 6 months ago. Regarding our conversation at the gala, the offer stands, $200K for a simple phone call when the time comes. Think about it. Maxwell's response was brief. Not interested, don't contact me again. He's been planning this for at least 6 months. I said, the timeline clicking into place. He knew eventually I'd find my mother's letter. He tried to get to you before I did. And when that failed, he moved to plan B, make you think I'm his man on the inside. Brilliant and vicious. Maxwell put his phone away. But here's what Victor doesn't know. He stole the physical originals, yes, but those documents aren't the only copies that exist, are they? For the first time in days, I felt something like hope. No, they're not. Tell me you backed everything up. Multiple times, multiple locations. I pulled out my own phone and showed him the file structure I'd created. Cloud storage across 3 different services. External hard drives with copies left with Rebecca Chen and 2 other friends who don't know each other. Paper copies in a safety deposit box in Philadelphia under a false name that not even you know. Victor can steal the originals, corrupt Maxwell's files, destroy every piece of physical evidence he can find. But he can't steal what's already been distributed and hidden in places he doesn't know about. Maxwell actually smiled, and the relief on his face looked genuine. Your mother would be proud. She taught you well. She taught me to think 10 steps ahead and never put all my faith in one place. I felt a surge of gratitude for my mother's paranoia for the lessons embedded in her careful documentation. They can steal paper, but they can't steal the truth that's already backed up in a dozen places they'll never find. So we're not actually set back, we're just inconvenienced, I finished. The physical originals might have been more convincing in court, but digital copies are admissible evidence if we can prove chain of custody, and we can. We spent the next hour planning our next move. We'd give the documents to federal prosecutors, not local law enforcement. We'd include the recording Lucia had given me. We'd coordinate everything to happen simultaneously so Victor couldn't respond before it was too late. I was starting to feel like we had a real chance when I heard a vehicle approaching the cabin. Maxwell and I both froze. No one knew where this safe house was except him. No one should have been coming here. The vehicle stopped. I heard a car door close, then silence. Maxwell moved to the window, peering through the curtain. "Someone left a package on the porch. They're driving away now." We waited 5 minutes, then Maxwell retrieved the package, while I watched from inside phone, ready to call 911. It was a manila envelope, unmarked except for my name written in handwriting I recognized immediately. Lucia's handwriting. Inside was a single document, the original handwritten codicil my mother had written before her death, the one that had been stolen from Maxwell's vault and replaced with a forgery. And a note from Lucia on a torn piece of paper. "I'm sorry. For everything. Victor had this. I took it from his safe. He doesn't know yet. Use it before he realizes it's gone. Run, Brooke. He's coming for you tonight." I read Lucia's warning 3 times. "He's coming for you tonight." The words sent ice through my veins. "We need to leave," Maxwell said, already moving toward the door. "If Lucia's right, if Victor knows you have the codicil—" "Wait." I looked at the note again, reading more carefully this time. Below the warning in smaller, shakier handwriting, Lucia had added, "Brooke. I've been watching Victor panic since you started investigating. He doesn't know I kept this. Our mother gave it to me a week before she died and told me to hide it somewhere safe to give it to you if anything happened to her. I was too young and scared to understand then. I'm scared now too, but I think Mom would want you to have this. There's a storage unit. The key and address are enclosed. I'm sorry for everything. Be careful. L." I dumped the envelope's contents onto the table. Along with the codicil, there was a small brass key and a piece of paper with an address scribbled on it. Secure Storage Solutions Unit 247, 2 hours north of the city. Below that, Lucia had written one more line, rented under Mom's maiden name, Catherine Whitmore. "Your mother had another storage unit," Maxwell said, picking up the key. "Different from the one where we found the first documents." "Apparently. And Lucia's had this key for 8 years. I felt a mixture of anger and understanding. Lucia had been 18 when my mother died, just a scared kid caught between a biological father she was learning to fear and a mother who'd entrusted her with something she didn't understand. She'd kept this secret for 8 years, and now she was finally breaking. "We go now," I decided. "If Victor's people are coming here, we don't want to be sitting ducks. And if there's more evidence in that storage unit, we need it before Victor figures out what Lucia did." We threw everything into my car, the codicil, my backup drive's shadow in her carrier, and drove north into the darkness. Maxwell kept checking the mirrors for following vehicles while I focused on the road, my mind racing with possibilities. What had my mother hidden that was important enough to give Lucia a separate key? What couldn't she trust to Maxwell's office or the previous storage location? The facility was on the outskirts of a small town, one of those generic self-storage places with rows of identical orange doors and security lighting that cast everything in harsh yellow. Unit 247 was in the back corner away from the main entrance. My hands shook as I unlocked the padlock with Lucia's key. Inside the unit was small but meticulously organized. Cardboard boxes labeled with dates and categories lined one wall. A laptop sat on a plastic storage bin sealed in a protective bag. And on top of everything, clearly meant to be found first, was a digital voice recorder with a note attached, "Press play." I picked up the recorder with trembling fingers and pressed the button. My mother's voice filled the small space and I nearly dropped the device. "This is Catherine Sinclair. Today's date is October 10th, 2017. Her voice was strong but strained, the voice of someone trying to stay composed while terrified. "If you're hearing this, I'm either dead or incapacitated. I've been investigating Victor Hayes for 8 months. I've documented his money laundering operation, his threats against my family, and his manipulation of my husband Harold." Maxwell and I stood frozen, listening. "But I fear I've made him desperate. He's been following me. I've seen the same car near my house, near my office places I go regularly. 2 days ago, I noticed brake fluid spots under my car that weren't there before. I took it to a mechanic I trust, and he said the system looked fine, but the spots worry me. I've informed Robert Maxwell of my concerns. If something happens to me before the authorities can act, this recording is proof of premeditation. The recording clicked off. I was crying hearing my mother's voice after 8 years of silence, hearing the fear she'd tried to hide. Maxwell's eyes were wet, too.
"There's more," he said quietly, checking the recorder's file list. "Multiple recordings." I played the next one, dated October 26th, 2 days before my mother died. Victor confronted me today in the parking garage at my office. He knows I've been collecting evidence. I don't know how, but he knows. He stood too close, invaded my space, and said, "Catherine, accidents happen to women who won't listen to reason." He smiled when he said it. Not a friendly smile. A promise. My mother's voice cracked slightly. "I'm terrified, but I won't back down. Brooke deserves to know the truth about this family. I've included DNA results in this storage unit proving she is Harold's daughter. Victor lied to Harold 20 years ago to turn him against his own child. I'm also including evidence that Lucia is Victor's biological daughter, though I'll protect that child regardless of her paternity. The financial documents prove Victor has been using Harold for decades. This must end even if—" Her voice broke entirely. "Even if I don't survive to see it end. Brooke, if you're hearing this, know that I love you. You're stronger than all of them. Finish what I started." I was sobbing now, and Maxwell had to take the recorder from my hands. We spent the next hour loading boxes into my car, my mother's voice echoing in my head, her fear and courage intertwined in those final recordings. As I carried the last box to the car, I glanced across the street, and my heart stopped. A black sedan sat in the parking lot of a closed gas station, engine running, and behind the wheel, illuminated by a streetlight, was the man who'd sat in my apartment, the man who represented Victor's interests. He'd found us. "Get in the car, now!" Maxwell's voice was sharp with urgency as he spotted the sedan. We threw the last box into the trunk and slammed it shut, Shadow meowing in protest from her carrier in the back seat. Maxwell took the driver's seat without discussion, and I was grateful my hands were shaking too badly to hold a steering wheel steady. As we pulled out of the storage facility, I watched the black sedan in the side mirror. It waited exactly 3 seconds, then pulled out behind us. "They're following," I said, my voice tight. "I see them." Maxwell accelerated onto the rural highway, heading back toward the city. The sedan accelerated to match. For a few miles it maintained a steady distance, and I almost convinced myself it was coincidence that we were being paranoid. Then the sedan sped up, closing the gap between us rapidly. "Call 911, Maxwell said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed. 911, what's your emergency? We're being followed and the vehicle is trying to force us off the road. We're on Route 9 heading south. I looked for a mile marker. Just past mile marker 47. Can you describe the vehicle? Black sedan, tinted windows, license plate. I tried to see it, but the glare from the headlights made it impossible. I can't see the plate. Stay on the line. I'm dispatching officers to your location. Can you reach a populated area? We're on rural roads, there's nothing out here. The sedan suddenly accelerated and pulled alongside us. Maxwell swerved to keep from being sideswiped. The sedan matched our movement deliberately, trying to force us toward the shoulder. Through the tinted window, I could barely make out the driver's silhouette, but I knew it was the same man who'd sat in my apartment, who'd threatened me with corporate euphemisms and dead eyes. They're trying to run us off the road, I shouted into the phone. Officers are en route, estimated 10 minutes. 10 minutes might as well have been 10 hours. The sedan swerved into us again, and Maxwell had to brake hard to avoid collision. We fishtailed slightly on the dark highway, and my heart lurched into my throat. This was how my mother died, forced off the road, made to look like an accident. Hold on, Maxwell said through gritted teeth, and suddenly he was accelerating hard, pulling ahead of the sedan. For a moment I thought we might outrun them, but the sedan was more powerful and quickly caught up. Then I remembered. Turn left at the next intersection, I shouted. That's not the way back. I know. My mother used to take shortcuts through Millbrook.
There's a residential area with narrow streets. They won't be able to follow us there without causing a scene. Maxwell trusted me and took the turn hard, tires squealing. We plunged into a neighborhood of winding streets and small houses. Where now? Right here, then, left at the stop sign, then right again. I was navigating from memory of childhood trips, my mother's voice echoing, "The back way is always safer, Brooke. Remember that." The sedan followed us into the neighborhood, but immediately had problems. The streets were too narrow for aggressive driving, and residents were outside in their yards, walking dogs, living their evening lives. The sedan couldn't force us off the road without witnesses, couldn't maintain aggressive pursuit without drawing attention. There, I pointed to a shopping center ahead. "The parking garage. We can lose them in there." Maxwell drove into the multi-level garage, spiraling up to the third floor, then cutting across to the opposite side and parking in a far corner behind a delivery van. He killed the lights and we sat in absolute silence, hearts pounding, watching the entrance. 5 minutes passed. 10, 15. The sedan never appeared. "I think we lost them," I whispered. Maxwell's hands were still gripping the steering wheel, and I noticed they were trembling. This distinguished, composed attorney, who'd guided me through my mother's estate with unflappable professionalism, was genuinely shaken. "Victor's not hiding anymore," he said quietly. "He's desperate, and desperate men are the most dangerous." We waited another 20 minutes before Maxwell dared start the car again. We took a completely different route back, constantly checking mirrors, jumping at every set of headlights. "We can't go to the local police," I said as we drove. "Victor has too much influence at the state and local level. My mother said that in her recordings." "Agreed. We need federal jurisdiction." Maxwell pulled out his phone at a red light and scrolled through contacts. "I have a friend at the FBI Financial Crimes Division. We worked together on a case 5 years ago. He owes me a favor, and more importantly, he can't be bought. Let me reach out and set up a meeting." "When?" "Tomorrow morning. Public location, federal building downtown. We give him everything. The recordings, the financial documents, Lucia's testimony. Everything at once, so Victor can't respond before it's too late." "I'm keeping the evidence with me tonight," I said firmly. "I don't trust it anywhere else." Maxwell nodded. "Probably wise. We'll find a hotel far from the city pay cash register under a different name. One more night, Brooke. Then we end this." We found a budget motel 2 towns over and paid cash for a room with 2 beds. I barely slept. Shadow curled beside me, my mother's voice recorder clutched in my hand like a talisman. Every sound outside made me bolt upright, convinced Victor's people had found us again. Dawn came slowly, and with it, a fragile sense of hope. Today, we'd go to the FBI. Today, we'd give them everything. Today, finally, Victor would face consequences. My phone rang at 7:30 a.m. Harold's name flashed on the screen, and something in my gut told me to answer. "Brooke." His voice was raw, terrified. "Victor called me. He knows you have evidence. He wants to meet with you. Today. Alone." "Absolutely not. He has Lucia." My blood went cold. "What?" "She's at his estate. He says she's a guest, but it's not voluntary. He says if you don't come, if you go to the authorities instead, Lucia will pay the price for her betrayal." Harold's voice broke. "Please, Brooke. Whatever you think of me, whatever I've done to you, she's still your sister. Don't let her die for helping you." "He has Lucia," Harold repeated when I didn't respond. "She's at his estate. He called it a voluntary visit. But we both know what that means. Victor wants you to come. Alone. He says he wants to negotiate." "I'm calling the police." He anticipated that. He has lawyers there with her right now documenting that she came of her own free will, that she's not being held against her will. Legally, he's covered. But Brooke, she's terrified. I can hear it in her voice. Please. I hung up and immediately turned to Maxwell. "We need to call your FBI contact now. Victor has Lucia and—" My phone buzzed with an email notification, then another, then a third in rapid succession. I opened the first one and felt my stomach drop. "What is it?" Maxwell asked. I couldn't speak. I just handed him my phone. The email contained a legal notice Victor Hayes had filed a civil lawsuit against me in Superior Court. The complaint ran to 47 pages, but the essence was clear: I was being sued for defamation harassment and attempted extortion. The lawsuit claimed I'd been spreading malicious false allegations about Victor Hayes, a respected businessman, in an elaborate scheme to extort money from him using fabricated evidence. Maxwell scrolled through the document, his face darkening with each page. "This is brilliant," he said grimly. "Evil, but brilliant. He's flipped the narrative. Now you're the aggressor. He's the victim. And if you go to the FBI today, his lawyers will claim you're retaliating against a man who had to sue you to stop your harassment." "But it's all lies." "That doesn't matter. The lawsuit itself creates a public record that damages your credibility. Every allegation you make now will be filtered through the lens of this lawsuit. Are you a concerned daughter exposing crimes? Or are you a vengeful woman who got caught trying to extort money and is now doubling down with false accusations?" The second email was worse. A temporary restraining order had been filed against my mother's trust fund. Victor's attorneys argued that the estate was under dispute due to questions about the validity of the codicil and other documents I'd presented. Until the lawsuit was resolved, all assets were frozen. "He's cutting off my resources," I said, the full scope of Victor's strategy becoming clear. "Without access to the trust I can't afford. Extended legal battles, forensic experts, investigators, any of the resources you'd need to fight him in court." Maxwell set my phone down. "This is how Victor operates, Brooke. He doesn't need to hire thugs to break your legs. He uses lawyers to break your ability to fight back. By the time these frivolous cases are dismissed, and they will be dismissed eventually, you'll be exhausted broke, and your credibility will be so damaged that any evidence you present will be viewed with suspicion." My phone rang again. Harold calling back. "Victor wants to meet with you today," Harold said without preamble. "He's at his estate. He says he's willing to negotiate. He has something you want: the original codicil, the one that was stolen from Maxwell's office. He'll trade it for your silence. A mutual non-disclosure agreement, a financial settlement, and both sides walk away. And Lucia, she's his leverage to make sure you show up. He says she's free to leave the moment you arrive. He just wants to talk face to face. No lawyers, no intermediaries. Just you and him." "It's a trap, Harold." "Of course it's a trap." Harold's voice broke. "But what choice do we have? If you don't go, God knows what he'll do to her. She betrayed him, Brooke. She stole from him to help you. He's not going to just let that slide. Please, I'm begging you. Whatever you think of me, whatever I've done to you, she's still my daughter, even if not by blood. Don't let her pay for helping you." The moral weight of his words crushed me. Lucia had finally done the right thing. She'd stolen the codicil from Victor's safe, given me the key to my mother's storage unit, provided evidence that could destroy him. And now she was paying the price for that choice. "I'll go," I heard myself say. "Brooke, no." Maxwell started. "What time?" I asked Harold. "He wants you there at noon. His estate. Come alone, or he says Lucia suffers the consequences." I hung up and looked at Maxwell. "I have to go." "It's a trap. You just said it yourself." "I know. But if I don't, he'll hurt Lucia. Or worse." Maxwell pulled out his tablet and brought up the lawsuit documents again, scrolling through them with focused intensity. Then he stopped, his face going pale. "What?" I asked. "Brooke, look at this. The filing date on the lawsuit, it says it was filed today, but look at the preparation dates on the exhibits. The evidence, Victor's lawyers compiled the witness statements, the documentation, it was all prepared weeks ago. Some of this dates back almost a month." I leaned over to see what he was pointing at. Document after document showed preparation dates from mid-November, even though we were now in early December. "He's been planning this specific endgame for weeks," Maxwell said slowly. "Long before we found the storage unit, long before Lucia gave you the codicil, Victor has been positioning pieces on the chessboard, preparing for this exact moment. The lawsuit, the restraining order taking Lucia, this isn't a reaction to what we've done. This is a premeditated strategy he's been building toward all along. The implications were staggering. Every move we'd made, every piece of evidence we'd found, every ally we'd gained, Victor had anticipated it all and prepared counter-moves in advance. We weren't just fighting a powerful man. We were fighting someone who'd been playing this game at a level we hadn't even understood. If he's been planning this for weeks, I said slowly, then he knows we'd never really trade silence for the codicil. He knows I'm going to keep fighting. Which means the meeting isn't about negotiation at all, Maxwell finished. It's about something else entirely. I drove to Victor's estate alone, but I wasn't going in blind. The recording device Maxwell had given me was concealed in a button on my jacket, already activated. My phone was in my pocket with GPS tracking enabled, sending my location to Maxwell in real time, and Maxwell's FBI contact was positioned 2 miles away, ready to respond if I didn't check in within the hour. Victor's estate was everything I'd expected: sprawling grounds, manicured gardens, a house that looked more like a manor. Old money architecture housing new money excess. I parked in the circular driveway and walked to the front door, my heart pounding but my steps steady. Victor himself answered the door, which surprised me. No butler, no assistant, just him. He was dressed casually but expensively, and his smile was warm, grandfatherly, completely at odds with everything I knew about him. "Brooke," he said as if greeting an old friend. "Thank you for coming. Please come in. Can I offer you tea? Coffee?" The civility was more unnerving than any threat could have been. I followed him through a marble foyer into a sitting room that probably cost more than my entire apartment building. Lucia sat on a cream-colored sofa, her hands folded in her lap, looking like a well-dressed hostage. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw fear there, but also something else, determination maybe, or resignation. "Please sit." Victor gestured to a chair across from him. "I'm glad you agreed to meet. We have much to discuss about your mother and the misunderstandings that have plagued this family for far too long." "Misunderstandings," I repeated flatly. "Is that what you call manipulating my father for 20 years, lying about my paternity to make him abuse me, killing my mother?" Victor's expression didn't change. Strong accusations. But I think if you listen to my side of the story, you'll understand things differently. Your mother and I were going to build a life together, Brooke. We were young, ambitious, deeply in love. We had plans, a business, a future, everything mapped out. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over his perfect grounds. Then Harold Sinclair appeared. Old money, established family connections, immediate security, and Catherine, your mother, she chose him. Not because she loved him more, but because he offered certainty where I offered dreams. His voice carried genuine pain. Do you know what that does to a man, Brooke? To be told you're not enough, to watch the woman you love choose comfort over passion. So you spent 20 years punishing her for it. I spent 20 years building an empire, Victor corrected, turning back to me. Proving I was worthy, that her choice was wrong. And when I finally had the success that Harold inherited, I came back. I offered Catherine a second chance. We had a brief reconciliation. Lucia was the result. He glanced at my sister. But then your mother chose Harold again. Even after everything, she stayed with him. Because she was protecting her children, I said. From you. Victor's eyes went cold despite the emotional timbre of his voice. She was protecting her comfortable lie. The money I helped Harold make through our business arrangements, the lifestyle she enjoyed, she didn't question where it came from until it suited her to develop a conscience. Then suddenly, I was the villain for giving her family the wealth they so freely spent. You were laundering money through Harold's business. I was creating opportunities. Harold was weak, unimaginative. Without me, he'd have been bankrupt decades ago. I made him successful, and your mother benefited from that success. But when she decided to investigate me, to threaten everything I'd built, she became dangerous. Not to me, Brooke, to herself. You killed her. No. Victor sat down again, his composure absolute. I didn't kill your mother. She died because she was reckless. She threatened to expose business arrangements that kept her family comfortable. She refused to listen to reason. Yes, I knew her brakes were failing. Did I warn her? No. But I didn't sabotage them either. I simply allowed nature to take its course. He leaned forward. Is that murder? Or is that justice? Is it my responsibility to save someone who's actively trying to destroy me? The twisted logic made my skin crawl. He actually believed what he was saying, believed he was justified. I've brought you here today to end this, Brooke. I'll give you the original codicil your mother wrote. You'll receive your inheritance, millions of dollars. All I ask is that you sign a non-disclosure agreement and stop this investigation. Your choice is simple financial security and silence or poverty and danger. Choose wisely. I opened my mouth to tell him exactly what he could do with his offer, but before I could speak, Lucia's voice cut through the room, shaking but clear. He's lying, she said, standing up. About Mom's death. He's lying, Brooke. I was there that day. I saw what he did to her car. The room went absolutely still. Victor's expression froze, and for the first time since I'd entered his estate, I saw genuine surprise on his face. What did you say? His voice was quiet, dangerous. Lucia stood up from the sofa, her legs visibly shaking, but her voice grew stronger as she spoke. I've stayed silent for 8 years because I was terrified of you, Victor. You've controlled me with money and threats since I was 20 years old. You made me dependent on you, made me complicit in your lies, made me believe I owed you my loyalty because you were my biological father. Tears streamed down her face. But I was 16 when Mom died. I skipped school that day. I was fighting with a friend and didn't want to deal with it. I came home early and saw your car in the driveway. I heard voices in the garage. Lucia, you need to stop talking, Victor said, his tone shifting to something cold and commanding. No. Lucia's voice cracked but held firm. I hid behind Mom's car. I watched you, Victor. I watched you open the hood and tamper with the brake line. You disconnected the brake fluid reservoir just enough that it would fail slowly, not immediately. You were so careful, so methodical. And when Mom came into the garage a few minutes later, getting ready to leave for her meeting, you smiled at her and said, "Be careful on your drive today, Catherine. Road conditions can be unpredictable." I felt like I couldn't breathe. This was it. This was the eyewitness testimony that proved Victor had murdered my mother. You're mistaken, Victor said smoothly. You were 16, upset about something, and your memory has distorted. I recorded it. Lucia pulled out her phone with trembling hands. I was a scared teenager who didn't know what to do. I didn't understand what you were doing to the car, but I knew it seemed wrong. So I turned on my phone's recording function and captured everything. Victor's composure cracked completely. You're lying. I wish I were. Lucia pulled up a file on her phone and played it. The audio quality was muffled. It had been recorded from a hiding spot by a frightened teenager, but it was clear enough. The sound of metal-on-metal tools being used. Victor's voice muttering to himself words I couldn't quite make out. Then footsteps and my mother's voice bright and unaware. Victor, what are you doing here? Just checking on something for Harold. Your husband asked me to look at your car, said you mentioned a strange noise. That's sweet of him, but the mechanic checked it last week. Everything's fine. Then Victor's voice smooth and almost concerned. Be careful on your drive today, Catherine. Road conditions can be unpredictable. The road is fine today, Victor. It's a beautiful morning. You never know when something might fail. There was a pause, and I could hear the weight of those words even through 8 years and a phone recording. Victor had told my mother to her face that something might fail, knowing he'd just sabotaged her brakes. I didn't understand then, Lucia said, her voice breaking. But 2 hours later, when the police came to tell us about the accident, I knew. I knew what you'd done, and I was too terrified to say anything because you'd already started grooming me, telling me I was your daughter, that you'd protect me as long as I stayed loyal to you. You've bought my silence with designer bags and luxury apartments for 8 years, Lucia continued, turning to face Victor fully. But you can't buy my soul. Brooke, I've been horrible to you your entire life. I was jealous that you had Mom's unconditional love while I was Victor's dirty secret, his leverage, his puppet. I'm so sorry for every cruel word, every dismissal, every time I made you feel unwanted in your own family. Lucia, I whispered, seeing my sister clearly for the first time. She turned back to Victor, her face wet with tears, but her voice steady. You're not my father in any way that matters. You're a murderer, and I won't protect you anymore. I won't be your accomplice in silence. I won't let you hurt anyone else the way you hurt my mother. Victor's expression shifted from shock to something colder, more calculating. He stood slowly, and I saw the mask of civility completely fall away. That recording is inadmissible in court. You were a minor when you made it. You obtained it without consent, and I have lawyers who will tear apart any attempt to use it. It proves nothing. He took a step toward us, and I instinctively moved closer to Lucia. But more importantly, ladies. Victor continued, his voice dropping to something dangerous. You're both in my house, and as far as anyone knows, no one else is aware you're here. I smiled. For the first time since entering Victor's estate, I actually smiled, and I watched his eyes narrow with confusion. Actually, Victor Maxwell knows exactly where we are. So does Special Agent Rachel Torres from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I'm wearing a recording device that's been transmitting this entire conversation to them in real time. I gestured to the button on my jacket. They've heard you admit to knowing about the brake failure on my mother's car. They've heard you describe watching her die as letting nature take its course. They've heard you threaten 2 women in your home, and they've heard Lucia's testimony and her recording. Victor's face went pale, but he recovered quickly. That's illegal surveillance. Nothing recorded here would be admissible. I'm in your home with your knowledge. You invited me. One-party consent. And Lucia consents to her own recording being used as evidence. You're not as smart as you think you are, Victor. I stood up slowly, and Lucia moved to stand beside me. You taught me something valuable today, though. You taught me that patience and preparation matter more than rage. You have nothing that will hold up in court, Victor said, but his voice had lost its confidence. You're bluffing. While you were busy stealing documents from Maxwell's storage facility, you didn't realize I'd already digitized everything weeks ago. Every financial record my mother collected, every piece of evidence. I made copies and distributed them to multiple secure locations, cloud services, external drives with trusted colleagues, paper copies in a bank vault in another state under a name you'll never find. I pulled out my phone and showed him the file structure. The financial documents proving your money laundering operation going back 20 years. A forensic accountant has already analyzed them. The pattern is undeniable, and federal prosecutors are going to love them. My mother's storage unit that you probably wish you'd found, we emptied it days ago. Her voice recordings documenting your threats already in federal hands. Lucia's recording from the day you murdered my mother, multiple backup copies. Victor's composure was crumbling. Your lawyer's restraining order on my trust fund, I continued. It doesn't matter. I don't need that money to destroy you, Victor. I just need the truth, and I have that in abundance. You can steal paper, you can corrupt files, you can buy people, but you can't steal the truth that's already been copied and distributed to places you'll never reach. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in Victor Hayes's eyes. He'd built his empire on control, controlling Harold, controlling Lucia, controlling every variable in his environment. But he couldn't control this. He couldn't control me. You think the FBI will move quickly enough? He was grasping now, desperate. I have connections. I have lawyers. This will take years to prosecute if it ever goes to trial. I'll drag your family through every public hearing, every deposition, every media opportunity. Harold will go to prison as my co-conspirator. Lucia will be exposed as the daughter of a criminal. You'll spend every penny of your inheritance on legal fees. By the time this is over, you'll have nothing. Is this really the outcome you want? His desperation was palpable, and for a moment I felt something almost like pity. This man had spent 30 years building toward revenge, had orchestrated an elaborate system of control and manipulation, had even killed my mother, and in the end, he was going to lose everything to a daughter he'd tried to erase. "I don't need you in prison tomorrow," I said quietly. "I don't need immediate justice or instant vindication. I just need you to know that I've won. The truth is out, Victor. My mother's truth, Lucia's truth, the truth about who you really are. And you can't kill it. You can't buy it. You can't manipulate it away. It exists now in too many places known by too many people." Lucia reached for my hand, and I took it, feeling the trembling in her fingers. "You're making a terrible mistake," Victor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The only mistake I made was waiting this long to finish what my mother started." That's when we heard them sirens in the distance growing louder. Victor heard them too, and his face went from pale to ashen. Maxwell hadn't waited for my check-in. The moment Victor had made his implicit threat, "No one knows you're here," Maxwell had called law enforcement. They'd been listening to everything, and they were coming. The sirens stopped outside, and moments later there was a firm knock at the door. Victor's carefully maintained composure shattered completely as he moved to answer it, and I saw what he'd probably never shown anyone before: genuine fear. Special Agent Rachel Torres entered with 3 other FBI agents and 2 local police officers as backup. She was professional, calm, holding several documents in her hand. "Victor Hayes, I'm Special Agent Torres with the FBI. We have federal search warrants for this residence, your offices at Hayes Development Group, and all associated properties. We're also serving notice that all your financial assets are frozen pending investigation into money laundering, fraud, and conspiracy charges." Victor wasn't handcuffed. There was no dramatic arrest scene like you'd see on television. White-collar criminals rarely get that treatment. Instead, Agent Torres handed him copies of the warrants while the other agents began the methodical process of securing the property, photographing rooms, preparing to box up documents and seize computers. "You're ordered not to leave the state," Agent Torres continued. "You'll be notified when to surrender for booking. I suggest you contact your attorney." The humiliation on Victor's face was profound. Federal agents moved through his pristine home, treating his carefully curated spaces like a crime scene. They photographed everything, tagged items, began the process of dismantling the empire he'd built over 30 years. For a man who'd controlled every variable through money and influence, this loss of control was devastating. He stared at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over, Brooke. I have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers, connections. I'll fight this for years if I have to." "Yes, it is," I said quietly. "It's over." Agent Torres gestured for Lucia and me to step outside, where Maxwell was waiting with Harold, who'd apparently driven straight here when Maxwell called him. Harold looked 10 years older than he had days ago, his face gray and drawn. "Dad?" I said, unsure what else to say. He looked at me, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw him truly see me. Not as an inconvenience, not as Victor's supposed child, not as a reminder of his failures, but as his daughter whom he'd wronged. "I was weak," he said, his voice breaking. "Victor manipulated me, controlled me, made me believe lies about you. But that's no excuse, Brooke. I abused my own daughter for 20 years. I destroyed your childhood based on fabrications I should have verified. I collaborated in Victor's crimes even if I didn't fully understand what I was doing." Tears ran down his face. "I deserve whatever legal consequences come. I deserve far worse than that." I didn't know what to say. The apology I'd waited 35 years to hear had finally come, but it couldn't undo the damage. It couldn't give me back the childhood I'd lost, or erase the scars of constant rejection. Over the next week, Harold's attorney negotiated a plea deal with federal prosecutors. Harold would cooperate fully against Victor, providing testimony, documentation, everything he knew about 30 years of financial manipulation. In exchange, his charges would be reduced. Instead of facing 20 years for money laundering conspiracy, he'd serve 3 to 5 years for financial crimes committed under duress and manipulation. Agent Torres called me to her office to discuss it. We're offering your father this deal because we believe his testimony will be crucial to convicting Victor Hayes on the most serious charges. But I want you to know we'll respect your input. If you believe Harold deserves harsher punishment, we'll take that into consideration. I sat in her office for a long time thinking about my mother's letter. You're stronger than all of them combined. Thinking about what my mother had tried to teach me through her careful planning and documentation. She'd wanted justice, but more than that, she'd wanted me to be free. Free from bitterness, free from the cycle of cruelty that had defined our family. My father was weak and cruel, I finally said. He hurt me deeply, and I'll carry those scars forever. But Victor Hayes was evil and calculating. Victor murdered my mother. Victor manipulated everyone around him for decades. Victor is the architect of all this suffering. I want the truly guilty party to face the harshest consequences. If letting Harold cooperate helps ensure Victor gets convicted, then I support the plea deal. Agent Torres nodded respect in her eyes. That takes real strength. I learned it from my mother, I said. Harold was arrested 2 days later, processed and released on bail pending his sentencing hearing. Victor remained free as well, though his movements were restricted and his assets frozen. The legal process, I learned, moved slowly. Building a federal case against someone like Victor Hayes would take months, possibly years. But something I hadn't anticipated was the media attention. The story had everything journalists loved: wealth, betrayal, murder, family secrets spanning decades. Within days, reporters were camped outside my apartment, my father's house, even Maxwell's office. Daughter exposes father's business partner in decades-long conspiracy. Local businessman charged with murder in wife's 8-year-old accident. Sisters unite against the man who controlled their family. My private pain became public spectacle, and I realized that winning in court came with a cost I hadn't fully prepared for. 3 weeks after the FBI descended on Victor's estate, I sat in Maxwell's office waiting for Harold. He'd been sentenced the previous day 4 years in a minimum security federal prison with credit for cooperation. He'd report to begin serving his sentence in 48 hours. This meeting was his idea, his last request before going away. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. The authoritative cold man who'd ruled our household had been replaced by someone hunched and gray. He'd lost weight. His hands shook slightly as he sat down across from me. The crimes, the guilt, the public exposure, all of it had broken something fundamental in him. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't." He nodded, accepting that. "I can't undo 35 years of cruelty, Brooke. I can't give you back the childhood you deserved, the father you should have had. I let Victor's lie turn me into a monster toward you. I hated you because every time I looked at you, I saw my own failure. Failure at what? At keeping your mother's love. At standing up to Victor. At being a man instead of a puppet." His voice cracked. "You looked like me, you had my mannerisms, and somewhere deep down, I think I knew you were mine. But accepting that would have meant accepting that I'd destroyed my relationship with my own daughter over a lie. It was easier to keep believing Victor, easier to keep hating you than to face what I'd done." I sat silent, letting him continue. "You deserved a father who protected you, encouraged you, loved you. Instead, you got me a weak, cruel coward who took out his failures on an innocent child. I'm sorry, Brooke. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm so deeply sorry." The apology I'd waited my entire life to hear had finally come, and it felt both healing and insufficient. Words couldn't give me back what I'd lost. "I forgive you, Dad," I said finally, and watched surprise flash across his face. "Not because what you did was okay, it wasn't. Not because words can heal 35 years of wounds, they can't. I forgive you because holding on to hatred would only hurt me now. Forgiveness is for my peace, not your absolution." "I understand. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. I'll never forget the birthday humiliation, the constant dismissals, the way you made me feel worthless and unwanted in my own family. Those scars are permanent. What I'm choosing to do is stop letting those scars control my life." I paused, choosing my words carefully. You'll have 4 years in prison to think about who you were and who you want to be when you get out. Maybe after you've served your time, we can have some kind of relationship. Maybe not. But I'm open to the possibility, which is more than you ever gave me. Harold broke down, then sobbing in a way I'd never seen him cry before. That's more than I deserve. That's more grace than I have any right to ask for. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you. We sat together for another hour, and for the first time in my life, we talked like actual father and daughter. It wasn't comfortable, and it couldn't erase the past, but it was a beginning. 2 days later, I met Lucia at a coffee shop downtown. She looked different. No designer clothes, minimal makeup, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was living in a modest apartment now, working as an office administrator, learning to survive without Victor's money. I judged you my whole life, she said immediately, not even waiting for our coffee to arrive. I thought I was better than you because I had designer things and you were simple. I mocked your normal job, your normal apartment, your normal life. But you were the one living with integrity, Brooke. I was living on blood money from a murderer. You were manipulated from a young age, I said. Victor groomed you. That doesn't excuse how I treated you. I was cruel because I was jealous. You had Mom's unconditional love, and I was just Victor's secret, his pawn. I'm sorry. For everything. I reached across the table and took her hand. You can rebuild, Lucia. You're only 32. You have time to figure out who you are when you're not being controlled by Victor or living off his money. I don't know how. I've never had to actually work for anything. You're doing it now. You have a job. You're paying your own rent. That's a start. I paused. Mom's estate is being finalized. The trust fund will be divided. You'll receive a portion because despite everything, Mom loved you. But I have one condition. Lucia looked up, hopeful and nervous. What? You use it to build something real. Education, maybe. Or a business that's yours built on your own work, not to chase the fake life Victor gave you. You use it to become the person you should have been all along. Tears streamed down Lucia's face. Deal. I promise. As we left the coffee shop, Lucia hugged me, really hugged me for the first time since we were children. Thank you for giving me a chance I don't deserve. We all deserve a chance to be better than we were, I said. That evening, I finally opened the box from my mother's storage unit that I'd been avoiding. Inside, wrapped in protective plastic, was one final letter marked in my mother's handwriting to be opened after justice is served. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. The envelope was heavier than I expected, multiple pages folded inside. I sat on my couch with Shadow curled beside me, and for a moment, I just held it, feeling the weight of my mother's final words. Outside, the city was alive with evening traffic and distant sirens. But inside my apartment, everything was still. I opened the letter and my mother's handwriting filled my vision, the same elegant cursive I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists, and the note she'd left in that first envelope 8 years ago. But this was different. This was longer, more personal, written in the voice of a woman who knew she might not survive to say these things out loud. My dearest Brooke, if you're reading this, it means you've done what I couldn't. You've exposed Victor and freed this family from his control. I'm so proud of you, though I won't be there to tell you in person. I was already crying and I'd only read 2 sentences. I need you to understand something about the choices that led to this moment. I made mistakes, Brooke. Terrible mistakes that had consequences I couldn't have foreseen. When I was young, I chose Harold for security instead of choosing love with Victor. Victor was passionate and ambitious, but he had nothing. Harold had everything, money, connections, a guaranteed future. I chose the safe path, and that choice set off decades of consequences. My mother's honesty was devastating. She wasn't trying to be the perfect martyr in this letter. She was being human, flawed, real. Years into my marriage, when Harold became distant, and Victor came back into our lives, I was lonely. I convinced myself that reconnecting with Victor was about rekindling something genuine, but looking back, I think I was just trying to recapture the passion I'd given up when I chose security. Lucia was born from that mistake, and I've lived with the guilt of that choice every day since. I thought about Lucia working her first real job, trying to figure out who she was without Victor's money. My mother had loved her despite the circumstances of her birth. But you, Brooke, you were never a mistake. You were born from a time when Harold and I still loved each other before Victor's poison entered our lives. You are the one pure good thing to come from this marriage. When Victor gave Harold that fake DNA test 20 years ago when he turned Harold against you with lies, it broke my heart into pieces I couldn't put back together. I pressed my hand to my mouth, remembering all those years of rejection, finally understanding that my mother had known the truth all along and been powerless to fix it. I wanted to tell you the truth, wanted to confront Harold, and Victor wanted to scream that you were being punished for a lie. But I feared Victor would kill me and leave you completely unprotected. So I built this plan, a plan that would only activate if the worst happened. I documented everything, hid evidence, prepared for the possibility that Victor would go too far. And I knew, Brooke, I knew you were strong enough to see it through. The faith she'd had in me, even knowing I'd have to face this alone, was almost too much to bear. You got your strength from me, I can see that clearly. But you got your integrity from being raised in hardship. In a strange, terrible way, Harold's cruelty made you resilient. You learned to survive without approval, to find your worth internally, rather than seeking it from people who couldn't give it. I wish you hadn't had to learn those lessons, but I'm grateful they made you into someone who can't be broken. I was sobbing now, Shadow meowing in concern and pressing her head against my arm. The final pages were the hardest to read through my tears. I want you to know that if I die, it won't be your fault. Victor is dangerous, and I've chosen to fight him knowing the risks. I'm doing this for you and Lucia so you both can live free of his manipulation and control. Use the evidence I've left. Expose him. Get justice. But more importantly, Brooke, live a life that's yours. She underlined those last words 3 times. Don't let bitterness consume you. Don't let this trauma define who you become. The opposite of abuse isn't revenge, it's building something beautiful from the ashes. Start a family if you want. Build a career that fulfills you. Travel, love, find joy in small things. And if you're able, help other women who've been controlled and belittled by powerful men. That's how you honor my memory, not by dwelling on what was taken from us, but by refusing to let that theft determine your future. The letter was signed simply, I love you forever, Mom. I sat there for an hour reading it over and over, feeling the weight of my mother's love and sacrifice settle into my bones. She'd known she might die. She'd chosen to fight anyway. And she'd prepared everything so that I could finish what she started and then move forward into a life she'd never get to see. That's when I knew exactly what I needed to do. 6 months later, I stood in a converted warehouse in downtown, looking at the sign that read, The Catherine Sinclair Foundation for Women's Empowerment. The space was filled with people, lawyers offering pro bono services, financial advisors, teaching money management, counselors trained in helping women escape toxic relationships. And women who needed help, who'd been where I'd been, who were finding their way out of situations they'd thought were inescapable. Today was our official opening, and I was about to give a speech that would transform my private pain into public purpose. I stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the faces gathered in the foundation space. Some were supporters. Maxwell was there. Lucia sat in the front row. Even Harold had sent a letter from prison to be read at the ceremony. But most were women we'd already helped in our first 6 months of quiet operation before today's official launch. Women who'd escaped controlling families, who'd found legal help when they thought there was none, who'd rebuilt their lives with the financial literacy training and counseling services we offered. My mother couldn't save herself. I began, my voice steady despite the emotions swelling in my chest. But she saved me by teaching me that the truth is more powerful than any lie, and that love outlasts hate. The Catherine Sinclair Foundation exists because one woman refused to let an evil man win even after her death. She documented evidence, built plans, left me the tools I needed to expose decades of manipulation and abuse. I glanced at my mother's photograph on the wall behind me, young, smiling, full of the life that Victor had stolen. We honor her by helping others refuse to be victims, by providing legal aid to women fighting toxic family situations, by offering financial education so women can build independence, by creating a community where women who've been told they're worthless can discover their true value. I paused, feeling tears threatening. My mother taught me that the opposite of abuse isn't revenge, it's building something beautiful from the ashes. This foundation is that beauty. The applause was warm and genuine, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something like peace settling into my bones. After the ceremony, as people mingled and toured the facility, an elderly woman approached me. She had kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun, and something about her felt familiar, though I was certain we'd never met. "Brooke Sinclair," she said warmly. "I'm Evelyn Morrison. I was a friend of your mother's in college." "Oh," I shook her hand, surprised. "I don't think Mom ever mentioned you." We lost touch over the years. Life took us in different directions. But I followed the trial in the news, and when I saw the foundation opening, I knew I had to come. She gestured to a quieter corner, and we moved away from the crowd. "There's something I wanted you to know, something your mother probably never told you, because she was ashamed of how it all started." I braced myself, unsure what revelation could still be left. When Catherine first met Victor Hayes, he seemed wonderful, charming, attentive, ambitious. We all thought they were perfect together. But I noticed things, small things at first. The way he'd get upset if she talked to other men. How he always needed to know where she was. The jealousy masked as devotion. Evelyn's expression darkened with the memory. I warned her. I told her those were red flags. And Catherine, smart woman that she was, she listened. She broke up with Victor. More than that. She chose Harold specifically to escape Victor. It wasn't about money, Brooke. It was about survival. She saw the controlling behavior escalating and knew she needed to get away from him. Harold was stable, kind in those early days, and most importantly, he wasn't Victor. Your mother thought she was saving herself by choosing the safer option. This reframed everything I'd thought I understood. My mother hadn't been materialistic or calculating. She'd been trying to escape an abuser, and that abuser had spent 35 years punishing her for getting away. She didn't realize Victor would never let go, Evelyn continued, that his obsession would span decades, that he'd worm his way back into her life and systematically destroy everything she'd tried to build. But even then, even when she knew she was in danger, she protected you. She built that plan left, that evidence gave you what you needed to finally end his control. Evelyn's eyes were wet. Your mother would be so proud of who you've become. Not just that you exposed Victor, but that you're using what you learned to help others. That's the Catherine I knew, always thinking about how to make things better for other people. We talked for another hour, and Evelyn shared stories of my mother I'd never heard, her determination, her compassion, her fierce protection of the people she loved. By the time Evelyn left, I felt like I'd been given a gift, a fuller picture of who my mother had been before Victor Hayes poisoned everything. That evening, I stood alone on the foundation building's balcony, watching the sun set over the city. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, beautiful and peaceful, and I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The humiliation of that birthday dinner felt like a lifetime ago. The investigation, the fear, the confrontation with Victor and his estate, all of it had led to this moment. Victor Hayes was now serving 25 years in federal prison for felony murder and money laundering. Harold was in minimum security prison attending therapy, trying to become a better man. Lucia was rebuilding her life with integrity, working toward a degree in social work. And me, I was finally free. "You were right, Mom," I said aloud to the sunset, knowing somehow she could hear me. "Revenge gave me justice, but truth gave me peace. I'm going to live now. Really live the way you wanted me to." A breeze touched my face, gentle and warm, and I smiled. I wasn't defined by what Victor had done, or by Harold's cruelty, or by 35 years of being dismissed. I was defined by what I chose to do with the freedom my mother had died to give me. The foundation would help hundreds of women find their own freedom. That was the legacy that mattered. And for the first time in 35 years, I felt my mother's presence, not as a memory of loss, but as a legacy of strength, guiding me toward a future built on truth, compassion, and unshakable peace. I'm writing this final reflection from my office at the foundation 2 years after everything began with that humiliating birthday dinner. It's strange how a moment of cruelty can become a catalyst for transformation, how the worst day of your life can lead to the best version of yourself. Victor Hayes is in year 2 of his 25-year sentence. The news occasionally reports on his appeals, all of which have been denied. His empire crumbled within months of his conviction, his properties sold to pay restitution to the people he'd defrauded over 3 decades. The man who controlled everything through money and manipulation now controls nothing but the small routine of his prison cell. Harold was released 6 months ago after serving 3 years. We have coffee once a month now, awkward conversations that are slowly becoming something resembling a relationship. He's different, humbled, genuine, trying. He volunteers with us at the foundation, sometimes speaking to families about the dangers of manipulation and the importance of questioning what you're told. He can't undo the past, but he's trying to build a different future. I respect that. Lucia completed her social work degree last spring and now works with us full-time. She runs our financial literacy program, teaching women how to build independence through smart money management. Watching her help other women escape the kind of control she lived under for so long has been one of the most beautiful parts of this journey. We're rebuilding what sisterhood should have been all along. But the real story isn't about Victor's downfall or my family's redemption. It's about what I learned from my mother's legacy and what I hope you'll take from hearing this story. My mother taught me that strength isn't about never being hurt. It's about what you do with the hurt after it happens. For 35 years, I was told I was worthless, unwanted, a mistake. I could have let those lies define me forever. Instead, I chose to prove that my worth was never dependent on their approval. That's the first lesson: your value doesn't come from people who can't see it. It comes from who you choose to be when no one is watching. The second lesson my mother left me was about the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is about making someone hurt the way they hurt you. Justice is about preventing them from hurting anyone else. When I exposed Victor, I wasn't just settling a personal score. I was protecting future victims, honoring past ones, and creating a system where women wouldn't have to fight these battles alone. That's meaningful. That's worth the cost. But perhaps the most important lesson was about forgiveness. I forgave my father not because he deserved it, but because carrying hatred was poisoning my future. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It means choosing not to let that hurt control the rest of your life. It means understanding that people can be both victims and perpetrators, both weak and capable of change. If you're listening to this story and seeing pieces of your own life in it, if you've been dismissed or controlled or told you don't matter, I want you to know something. You are stronger than the people who tried to break you. Your story isn't over. The narrative that others wrote about you doesn't have to be the narrative you live. And if you've been the one doing the dismissing, if you recognize yourself in Harold's weakness, or even Victor's control, it's not too late to change. Redemption is possible, but it requires honest reckoning with what you've done and genuine commitment to becoming someone different. My mother couldn't save herself, but she saved me by refusing to let evil win even after her death. Now I spend my days helping other women discover that same truth, that love is stronger than hate, that truth outlasts lies, and that the best revenge is a life well lived in service of something larger than yourself. So I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who seemed too powerful to fight? Have you had to choose between revenge and peace? How did you find your strength when everything seemed impossible? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to find the courage to take their first step toward freedom. And if this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that you're not alone in your struggles, subscribe to this channel. hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because the more we tell these stories, the more we break the silence that allows manipulation to thrive, the more we create a world where daughters like me don't have to wait 35 years to discover their worth. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of my mother's legacy. And remember, you are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and worthy of a life built on truth and peace.